The timeless narratives of ancient Greece beckon, inviting a slow and gentle immersion into their whispered wisdom. These are not merely stories, but profound echoes from millennia past, painstakingly preserved through countless generations, much like cherished heirlooms passed tenderly from one family member to the next. As the clamour of the modern world recedes, much like the morning mist dissipating over the azure Aegean, these enduring myths offer a tranquil escape, promising insights into a world where the extraordinary was commonplace. There exists an undeniable enchantment in the collective appreciation of these venerable tales. Across continents and time zones, individuals gather, whether under the fading light of a twilight sky or in the profound stillness of the late hours, forming a silent, global fellowship. This shared journey through myth unites dreamers and enthusiasts, fostering a unique community bound by a fascination for the narratives that shaped civilization. With the present moment gently receding, the stage is set for an expedition into an epoch when divine beings traversed the mortal realm, and every peak concealed a profound enigma. It is a world awaiting discovery, where the boundaries between the mundane and the miraculous were fluid, and ancient secrets lay embedded within the very landscape. Imagine a foray into the secluded depths of an ancient Greek forest, a sanctuary where the very air was imbued with the sharp fragrance of pine needles and the earthy scent of wild herbs. Above, the dense canopy of trees acted as a natural filter, allowing only scattered shafts of golden sunlight to pierce through, dappling the forest floor in luminous patterns. It is within this pristine, rarely trodden wilderness, the preferred domain of the formidable goddess Artemis, that the unfolding narrative finds its genesis. Artemis, a deity of formidable independence, stood in stark contrast to her Olympian kin, who often revelled in the bustling social dynamics of Mount Olympus. As the revered goddess of the hunt and the vigilant guardian of untamed creatures, her supreme value lay in solitude and the inviolability of her personal space. While her divine counterparts indulged in opulent banquets and the theatricality of their eternal squabbles, Artemis found solace and strength deep within the serene wilderness, accompanied only by her loyal hunting retinue. On this fateful afternoon, the goddess had pursued her quarry since the first blush of dawn. Her iconic silver bow, a testament to her prowess, shimmered faintly in the fragmented sunlight, while her devoted pack of hunting hounds moved with an almost ethereal silence through the dense underbrush. Yet, as the sun ascended to its zenith, casting its most potent rays upon the earth, Artemis yearned for a respite from the chase. Her desire now turned to the profound tranquility of a ritualistic cleansing, a moment of profound personal restoration. Nestled within the very heart of this ancient woodland, concealed behind a verdant veil of weeping willow branches, lay Artemis's clandestine bathing pool. Its waters, fed by a pristine, natural spring that ceaselessly bubbled forth from the earth's profound depths, remained perpetually cool and exquisitely clear. The basin was adorned with smooth, river-worn stones, while a carpet of velvety moss softened the rocks encircling its edge. It was an ethereal sanctuary, so hallowed and hushed that its very presence compelled a reverent silence, even in utter solitude. With a deliberate motion, Artemis parted the concealing willow branches and entered her sacred haven. Her devoted hunting companions, the nymphs, beings who had forsaken their traditional abodes in rivers and trees to serve her, immediately attended to her needs. With practiced grace, they unlaced her sturdy leather boots, carefully detached her quiver brimming with silver-tipped arrows, and respectfully set aside her treasured bow. As the goddess descended into the refreshingly cool water, a gentle sigh of profound contentment escaped her lips. This was indeed the zenith of her day, a precious interlude where the immense responsibilities of an Olympian deity momentarily receded, allowing her to simply savour the exquisite sensation of the cool, pure water on her skin after a strenuous morning's pursuit. Yet, as the goddess found solace, an unforeseen disruption was hurtling towards her sanctuary. Not far distant, a young mortal hunter named Actaeon, whose movements lacked the inherent grace of Artemis, was crashing heedlessly through the dense woodland. While Actaeon possessed exceptional skill in the art of the hunt, his spatial awareness and caution often proved deficient. He had spent the entire morning in relentless pursuit of a particularly elusive deer, meticulously tracking its hoofprints ever deeper into the heart of the forest. His eager hunting dogs, their noses pressed firmly to the earth, surged ahead, utterly consumed by the compelling scent trail. Unbeknownst to Actaeon, his relentless chase was leading him directly into a realm of profound sanctity. This specific expanse of the forest was consecrated to Artemis, a domain strictly forbidden to mortal trespassers. Naturally, in the era of ancient Greece, no explicit markers or warning signs delineated this sacred boundary, unlike the regulations of a modern nature preserve. Nevertheless, an almost palpable essence of primordial power permeated the very air, an intangible aura that, had he been attuned, should have served as an unmistakable harbinger to retreat. Driven by the alluring murmur of running water, Actaeon forced his way through an exceptionally dense thicket of bushes. His mind was fixed on the possibility that his elusive quarry might have paused for a refreshing drink. The sudden silence of his usually boisterous dogs, a sure sign of nearing their prey, only intensified his focus. And then, with an abruptness that defied comprehension, he emerged from the foliage, finding himself standing utterly still at the very edge of Artemis's clandestine pool. In that singular, suspended moment, the natural rhythm of the forest seemed to cease its breath. There, amidst the crystalline waters, was Artemis herself, her form radiant, encircled by her devoted nymphs. Her gaze, initially wide with unadulterated shock at the sight of this unforeseen intruder, swiftly sharpened, her luminous silver eyes narrowing with a perilous intensity. The sanctity of her private ritual had been irrevocably shattered. One might reasonably surmise that Actaeon would have instantaneously offered fervent apologies and fled the scene. Indeed, such a swift retreat would have been the sagacious course of action. Instead, he remained transfixed, rooted to the spot, his gaze unwavering. Perhaps the sheer magnitude of his surprise rendered him immobile. Or perhaps he was utterly enthralled by the breathtaking vision of an actual goddess. It is also possible he simply could not reconcile the incredible sight with reality. Artemis's nymphs, gasping in collective alarm, instinctively moved to interpose themselves between their divine mistress and the brazen mortal. Yet their efforts were in vain. The forbidden sight had already been witnessed. Actaeon had glimpsed what no mortal eye was ever destined to behold. And Artemis, the formidable goddess of the hunt and the fierce guardian of her inviolable privacy, was consumed by an incandescent rage. It is a salient characteristic of the Olympian deities that their wrath seldom manifested in mere vocal outbursts. Instead, they favoured retribution of a far more imaginative and often terrifying nature. Artemis, renowned for her ingenuity, proved exceptionally adept at fashioning suitable penalties for those who dared to infringe upon her sacred solitude. With a deliberate motion, she extended her hand, scooping a measure of the cool spring water into her palms. As it rested there, the liquid began to pulse with an ethereal, divine luminescence. Uttering not a single word, she then hurled the potent, enchanted water directly at Actaeon's face, sealing his fate. The enchanted water struck Actaeon like a searing splash of liquid starlight. Initially, he registered nothing beyond a fleeting coolness upon his skin. Then, with an insidious and disquieting slowness, a profound alteration began to take hold. The first harbinger of his dreadful fate emerged in his own reflection upon the water's surface, where his familiar human visage should have appeared. A grotesque distortion stared back. His nose elongated and darkened, his ears grew disproportionately and shifted their position, migrating to the crown of his head. Most horrifyingly, magnificent branching antlers, undeniably real, began to forcibly erupt from his very skull. In a desperate surge of terror, Actaeon attempted to cry out, to articulate an apology, to explain that his intrusion had been entirely unintentional. Yet, when he parted his lips, no human words emerged. Instead, a startled, guttural bleat, the unmistakable sound of a deer, escaped him. Gazing down at his extremities, he saw that his hands had vanished, replaced by hardened hooves. His garments, once snug, now hung loosely upon his rapidly shrinking and transforming physique. Though his human consciousness remained agonizingly intact, imprisoned within, his physical form had become entirely that of a majestic stag. Then a sound pierced the forest's quiet that sent a fresh wave of primal terror coursing through his newly formed deer heart, the familiar, yet now terrifying baying of dogs. His very own hunting pack, alerted by the strange sounds of his metamorphosis, burst through the undergrowth, eager to investigate. But their keen eyes did not recognize their beloved master Actaeon. All they perceived was a magnificent, large stag standing conspicuously close to their favored hunting grounds. Instinctively, they responded as generations of their kind had been trained to do. Actaeon, in a desperate, silent plea, attempted to communicate with them, to convey his true identity. Alas, a deer possesses no tongue for the language of hounds, and his once loyal companions saw only an irresistible quarry where their master had stood moments before. What transpired next unfolded as arguably the most poignant and agonizing chapter of this entire narrative. Actaeon, his human consciousness still agonizingly intact but now cruelly imprisoned within the agile body of a deer, was compelled to flee for his very existence from his own cherished hunting pack. He plunged headlong through the dense forest, vaulting over gnarled fallen logs and artfully weaving between ancient trees, while behind him his dogs pursued with the same relentless fervour they had always displayed when hunting by his side. He ran until his new-found deer legs quivered with utter exhaustion, seeking refuge behind massive rocks and within impenetrable thickets. Yet, inexorably, as the sun began its slow descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of sombre farewell, his own loyal hounds finally closed in. Concurrently, at the tranquil pool, Artemis had completed her ritualistic bath and once again donned her formidable hunting attire. Her attending nymphs clustered around her, their hushed conversation still revolving around the audacious mortal who had so brazenly intruded upon their hallowed sanctuary. Was such severity truly necessary? One of the nymphs ventured, her voice barely a whisper. He appeared so youthful. Perhaps he was merely disoriented. Artemis retrieved her magnificent silver bow, testing its taut string with a solitary finger, which resonated with a soft, almost musical hum in the profound stillness of the forest. "Privacy is inviolable," she stated with stark simplicity. "Mortals must comprehend that certain boundaries are sacrosanct and must never be transgressed, not even through unwitting error." She then paused, her senses acutely attuned to the distant murmurs of the ancient woods. From afar, the triumphant baying of dogs reached her ears, a sound whose grim implication she understood with absolute certainty. "Furthermore," she appended, her voice perhaps carrying a fractional, almost imperceptible softness, "he was a hunter. He possessed an intrinsic comprehension of the delicate, brutal balance between predator and prey. Now he has been granted the profound and tragic experience of both roles within that eternal dynamic." As the mantle of night descended upon the ancient forest, Artemis and her retinue seamlessly melted into the deepening shadows cast by the venerable trees, vanishing as if into the very fabric of the wilderness. They left behind only the enduring murmur of the effervescent spring and the melancholic whisper of the wind sifting through the trailing willow branches, a haunting silence that seemed to hold countless unspoken secrets. Yet this compelling narrative leaves one pondering its deeper implications. Was Artemis's swift and brutal retribution solely a defense of her cherished privacy, or did a more profound cosmic justice unfold that day? In the spiritual landscape of the ancient world, it was widely held that the Olympian deities frequently employed severe lessons to impart fundamental truths to mortals concerning reverence, the observance of sacred boundaries, and the inescapable repercussions of one's actions. The fate of Actaeon himself remains shrouded in a degree of ambiguity. Certain renditions of the myth insinuate that his trespass was not entirely unwitting, suggesting he may have deliberately sought out the goddess, driven by a forbidden desire to glimpse her divine form. Conversely, other accounts portray him as an authentically lost hunter, an unfortunate soul who merely stumbled into a profoundly wrong place at an irrevocably wrong time. The enduring question persists: was Artemis's punishment a just consequence for a grave transgression, or did it represent an excessively cruel decree for what might have been an innocent, albeit catastrophic, error? Such ancient tales compel all who hear them to reflect on the nature of fate, divine power, and the perilous crossroads where mortal curiosity meets immortal wrath. The previous discussion concerning equitable retribution now guides our attention toward a significantly more sinister narrative, one steeped in dynastic apprehension and the horrific actions individuals are compelled to commit when gripped by the dread of relinquishing authority. Should the severity of Artemis's judgment upon Actaeon have struck you as extreme, prepare yourself for the chilling account of Kronos and the unspeakable atrocities he inflicted upon his own offspring. Our journey now extends further into the annals of time, reaching back to the primordial genesis of existence as conceptualized by the ancient Hellenic civilization. This era predates the majestic reign of Zeus from the lofty heights of Mount Olympus, predates the construction of sacred temples or bustling human metropolises. Indeed, it predates the very advent of humanity itself. During this nascent epoch, the cosmos was governed by formidable entities known as Titans, colossal, immensely potent beings who represented the direct progeny and subsequent generations of the earth itself. Among these formidable rulers, Kronos held undisputed dominion as the sovereign of all Titans. Kronos, however, did not ascend to his royal station through any form of popular mandate or serene succession. On the contrary, his acquisition of supremacy was marked by a horrifying act perpetrated against his own progenitor, Uranus, utilizing a crescent-shaped scythe bestowed upon him by his mother. Kronos had launched a brutal assault on Uranus, orchestrating a cataclysmic overthrow that fractured the very bedrock of cosmic order. One might logically surmise that such a triumphant usurpation of his father's authority would have instilled in Kronos an unwavering sense of security in his dominion. Yet the inverse proved to be the case. Each waking moment was consumed by a gnawing apprehension that he, too, might suffer a similar fate. Every evening, as he sought repose, his mind was plagued by the unsettling query of whether one of his own progeny was secretly conspiring against him, mirroring the very treachery he had visited upon his own father. Then a pivotal day arrived, when Kronos was delivered a prophetic utterance that rendered his most profound anxieties almost trivial by comparison. This grim oracle emanated directly from the fates themselves, a trio of primordial siblings possessed of the uncanny ability to discern the intricate strands of predestination unfurling into the epochs to come. Their pronouncement was stark, utterly dreadful, and utterly beyond dismissal. A descendant of your own bloodline shall depose you just as you dislodged your father from his throne. Under ordinary circumstances, individuals confronted with unsettling premonitions regarding their future might endeavour to alter their conduct in an effort to avert an undesirable conclusion. They might elect to cultivate a more benevolent parental disposition or nurture their offspring with an abundance of affection and a paucity of apprehension. Kronos, regrettably, chose to adopt a far more immediate and brutal strategy. His reasoning was chillingly simple. If he possessed no offspring, then no child could ever challenge or usurp his authority. However, an unforeseen complication arose. Kronos was already wedded to his sibling Rhea. Indeed, such consanguineous unions were seemingly customary among the Titan lineage, and Rhea was at that very moment carrying their inaugural child. Thus, Kronos conceived a scheme that was simultaneously straightforward in its conception and utterly abhorrent in its execution. He would permit his progeny to enter the world, and then, without hesitation, he would devour them. Envision the harrowing tableau accompanying the arrival of their firstborn, a daughter christened Hestia. Rhea, utterly spent from the arduous ordeal of parturition, yet radiant with the effulgence of nascent motherhood, cradled her infant intimately, her gaze softening as she beheld the minuscule, flawless countenance. She likely envisioned a future replete with delightful lessons she would impart to her daughter, countless wondrous locales they would discover in tandem, and an boundless reservoir of affection they would reciprocate. It was at this tender moment that Kronos strode into the chamber. "Yield the child to me," he commanded, his voice a profound, resonant rumble characteristic of his Titan nature. Rhea undoubtedly presumed he yearned to embrace his daughter, to bestow upon her a father's benediction and welcome her into existence. Instead, Kronos seized the infant within his gargantuan hands, distended his maw to an unimaginable breadth, and consumed diminutive Hestia in a single dreadful swallow. Is it truly possible to fathom the abyssal terror that engulfed Rhea? Can one conjure the image of her anguished cries echoing through the air, her frantic, futile efforts to intercede, her utter failure to comprehend the unfathomable depravity that drove her consort to such an unspeakable act? Yet Kronos merely wiped his lips with an air of casual finality and departed, his monstrous deed accomplished, content in the conviction that he had successfully neutralized at least one nascent menace to his supreme authority. The most profoundly distressing aspect of this unfolding tragedy is that it did not represent an isolated incident of deranged impulsivity. Upon the birth of their second offspring, a daughter designated Demeter, the identical horrific scenario transpired. Kronos seized the infant and ingested her entirely. Subsequently arrived Hera, their third child, who met precisely the same grim destiny. Then Hades, their inaugural son, vanished into oblivion with a singular gulp. Following him, Poseidon, their second son, experienced a similar fate. Another swift swallow, another precious child, irrevocably lost within the cavernous maw of their father. At this juncture, a natural inquiry might arise. What became of these children once Kronos had consumed them? Were they consigned to a mortal end? The revelation proves simultaneously disquieting and oddly reassuring, for Kronos, as an immortal Titan, possessed an inherent indestructibility. His progeny, sharing this divine lineage, were likewise immortal. Consequently, their ingestion did not result in their demise. Rather, they discovered themselves incarcerated within his vast stomach, perpetually alive, yet confined within an unending, Stygian gloom. Endeavour to conceive the experience of being one of those captive children. You possess consciousness. You retain cognitive faculties. You can discern the proximity of your siblings within the oppressive darkness. However, egress is impossible. Maturation is denied. The exploration of the expansive world is an unattainable dream. There is naught to do but endure, suspended in the tepid, constricted blackness of your father's cavernous abdomen. Concurrently, Rhea's spirit was progressively consumed by an intensifying despair and profound grief with each successive child she forfeited. She implored Kronos, beseeching him to cease his abominable acts. She attempted concealment when the pangs of labour commenced. She entreated other Titans for their assistance, yet Kronos reigned as the supreme monarch, and the pervasive terror he inspired rendered everyone unwilling to intercede. By the time Rhea found herself gravid with her sixth offspring, she understood with absolute certainty that a radical departure from her previous actions was imperative. She could no longer countenance the loss of another infant to her husband's insatiable, paranoiac appetite. Thus, she formulated a stratagem that was simultaneously ingenious and fraught with immense peril. When the auspicious moment arrived for the sixth child's advent, Rhea eschewed their customary palatial residence. Instead, she journeyed to a remote, concealed grotto nestled upon the verdant island of Crete. There, attended by benevolent nymphs who diligently subdued the sounds of her labour, she brought forth a son, whom she christened Zeus. However, rather than conveying the infant Zeus back to his tyrannical father, Rhea meticulously swaddled a sizable stone within layers of infant blankets. She painstakingly ensured the stone possessed the approximate dimensions and heft of a newborn. She even adorned it with a tiny cap, ensuring that from a casual distance it would perfectly mimic an actual baby. Subsequently, she returned to their abode and presented this carefully fabricated deception to Kronos. One might naturally presume that a father would possess the innate discernment to distinguish between a living infant and a mere lithic mass enshrouded in swaddling clothes. Yet, it is crucial to recall that Kronos harboured no desire for fatherhood. His entire being was consumed by the singular objective of annihilating prospective challenges to his supremacy, so much so that he never deigned to genuinely scrutinize his offspring before their instantaneous consumption. Thus, when Rhea proffered the bundle, Kronos accepted it without any genuine inspection, and, in his customary fashion, ingested the stone whole, precisely as he had devoured his 5 preceding children. Concurrently, the infant Zeus remained sequestered within the cavern on Crete, where he was nurtured by the devoted nymphs and sustained by a diet of golden honey and the nourishing milk of a miraculous caprine, Amalthea. With each passing day he burgeoned in stature and strength, and with unwavering regularity Rhea clandestinely visited him, recounting tales of his unfortunate siblings languishing within the confines of their father's digestive cavity. As Zeus transitioned from infancy to burgeoning manhood, he assimilated the chilling narrative of his father's profound terror and the ghastly deeds that such apprehension had compelled him to commit. And so, with deliberate calculation, Zeus commenced plotting his retribution. Yet, it is precisely this facet that imbues the narrative with its singular intrigue. Zeus's machinations extended beyond merely chastising his father for his inherent barbarity. His overarching objective also encompassed the liberation of his entrapped brethren and sisters. In stark contrast to Kronos, who perceived his offspring solely as existential threats, Zeus regarded them as integral members of his lineage, individuals who unequivocally merited emancipation. The profound query that perpetually vexed Zeus during his strategic deliberations was this: was he irrevocably fated to mirror the tyrannical nature of his progenitor? Would the act of dethroning Kronos merely transform him into yet another despotic sovereign, condemned to a future of fear and the eventual destruction of his own progeny? Or, conversely, could he shatter the pernicious cycle of violence that had been transmitted from Uranus to Kronos, and now loomed ominously to perpetuate itself through his own reign? What then, in your estimation, propels an individual to perceive their own issue as adversaries? Is the sole impetus merely the terror of relinquishing dominance? Or does a more profound force operate, an intrinsic incapacity to cherish others more profoundly than one cherishes one's own precarious sense of safety and control? Shifting our focus from the intricate patterns of generational brutality and their unforeseen repercussions, our subsequent narrative commences with one of the most exquisitely beautiful denouements conceivable, blossoming directly from one of the most savage acts chronicled within the entirety of mythological lore. It is as if the ancient Hellenes sought to impart a profound truth. From the crucible of even the most dreadful occurrences, something truly magnificent can emerge. Do you recall the details of Kronos's audacious coup, wherein he deposed his father, Uranus, using that distinctively curved weapon. Indeed, the venerable narrators of antiquity held exceptionally precise notions regarding the events that transpired subsequent to that moment of profound violence. Their conviction was that when Uranus sustained his grievous injury, vital droplets of his immortal ichor descended into the vast expanse of the sea, and from that celestial fluid, commingling with the frothing effervescence and saline essence of the ocean, an extraordinary, almost supernatural phenomenon commenced its genesis. Permit your imagination to conjure the vista. The azure expanse of the Mediterranean Sea on a dawn so utterly tranquil that its surface shimmered like a meticulously burnished pane of glass. The nascent sun was merely beginning its ascent, suffusing the heavens with tender hues of rose and auric luminescence. Diminutive undulations murmured softly against the coastline, conveying their customary oceanic offerings, fragments of lustrous sea glass, intriguing conch shells and intricate skeins of marine vegetation. Yet, on this specific morning, the incoming tides bore an object of utterly unparalleled significance. Initially, its appearance suggested nothing more than typical sea foam, that ephemeral white, effervescent substance generated by the collision of waves against rocky outcrops. However, this particular froth possessed an altogether distinct quality. It emanated a gentle nacreous luminescence. It did not dissipate into the ether like conventional foam. Instead, it incrementally expanded in size and intensified in radiance as it glided shoreward. And then, with an unhurried, elegant unfolding, a form began to materialize from within the incandescent foam. This was Aphrodite, the venerated goddess of profound affection and resplendent allure, manifesting into being directly from the very bosom of the ocean. The ancient Hellenes held exceptionally precise notions regarding the quintessential form of beauty in existence. Aphrodite was not merely aesthetically pleasing, she embodied the very essence of pulchritude made manifest. Her tresses, a cascade of radiant gold, captured the nascent daylight as if meticulously spun from the sun's own rays. Her complexion possessed the flawless, unblemished smoothness of a perfectly formed pearl, while her eyes mirrored the profound azure of the deep ocean on a tranquil summer afternoon. Yet, beyond her striking physical attributes, an intangible quality in Aphrodite's aura seemed to elevate the charm of everything in her vicinity. The frothy sea foam that enveloped her glistened with the brilliance of countless diamonds. The unassuming seashells scattered at her feet were instantly transformed into objects of precious, jewel-like splendor. Even the gulls, soaring effortlessly above, appeared to execute their aerial dances with heightened grace and elegance whenever she was near. Upon Aphrodite's initial contact with the terrestrial realm, a miraculous phenomenon unfolded. Flowers spontaneously bloomed within her fresh footprints. These were no ordinary blossoms, but roses, the most exquisitely beautiful and intoxicatingly fragrant roses anyone had ever witnessed. It was as though the very earth itself erupted in a vibrant, perfumed celebration of her divine arrival. However, a particularly intriguing aspect of this seminal moment lies in Aphrodite's unique genesis. She emerged fully matured, imbued with an intrinsic, complete understanding of her identity and the full scope of her inherent powers. Unlike nascent mortal infants who must painstakingly acquire all knowledge and understanding, she instantly comprehended her divine status and recognized that her dominion encompassed love, in all its multifaceted expressions. And love, as Aphrodite swiftly discerned, proved to be in far more intricate and profound force than simply eliciting feelings of happiness in individuals. The immediate observation she made was the palpable impact of her presence on the surrounding fauna. A pair of dolphins, previously engaged in casual aquatic maneuvers near the shoreline, spontaneously commenced an elaborate courtship ballet, executing synchronized leaps and graceful spins through the water. Two seagulls, engrossed in a squabble over a discarded fish, abruptly abandoned their dispute and began tenderly preening each other's feathers with newfound affection. Even the local flora responded to her pervasive influence. Vines that had been growing in divergent directions suddenly began to intertwine with one another, while solitary trees appeared to lean subtly towards their neighbouring counterparts, as if yearning for companionship. But Aphrodite also perceived a deeper, more profound undercurrent, the pervasive loneliness that permeated the entirety of the world. In the boundless ocean behind her, she could acutely sense the profound isolation of creatures navigating the solitary vastness of the depths. On the land stretching before her, she detected animals and even unseen spirits who had never experienced the solace of genuine companionship. And most remarkably, she could discern the intricate emotional landscapes of her fellow gods, despite having never encountered them. Somewhere in the distant reaches she sensed Zeus's complex internal conflicts regarding power and the immense weight of responsibility. She felt Hera's arduous struggle, torn between profound love and searing jealousy. She even perceived the underlying solitude of Artemis, who, despite choosing a path of independence, occasionally harboured an unarticulated wonder about what she might be forsaking. It was at this juncture that Aphrodite made a momentous decision, one destined to profoundly influence the destinies of both gods and mortals for all eternity. She resolved that her divine purpose would extend beyond merely representing the concept of love. She would actively cultivate and create opportunities for love to flourish across the cosmos. She initiated her grand endeavour on a smaller scale, focusing on the creatures immediately within her sphere of influence. She encouraged the dolphins to actively seek out compatible companions. She facilitated the lonely seabirds in their quest for mates. She even subtly manipulated the ocean currents, orchestrating serendipitous encounters for fish that had previously navigated the waters in isolation. However, as she ambled along the shoreline, diligently exploring this burgeoning world into which she had been divinely born, Aphrodite began to grasp that love was not invariably a straightforward blessing. She observed a pair of crabs engaged in a ferocious territorial skirmish and recognized that the inherent desire to protect that which one cherishes could, paradoxically, instigate bitter conflict. She witnessed a mother bird aggressively repelling other avian creatures who ventured too close to her nest, thereby comprehending that love frequently encompassed elements of possessiveness and fierce jealousy. Most surprisingly, she discovered that her very presence could inadvertently engender complications. When she happened upon a group of young dolphins, they all immediately succumbed to an overwhelming infatuation with her, abandoning their pre-existing social bonds and trailing her along the shore. This revelation underscored the critical necessity for her to master the control of her potent influence, to wield it with thoughtful deliberation rather than permitting it to indiscriminately affect every being in her vicinity. This pivotal experience served as Aphrodite's inaugural lesson in the immense responsibility intrinsically linked to her extraordinary powers. To be the goddess of love did not simply entail orchestrating universal infatuation. Rather, it necessitated a profound understanding of the delicate equilibrium between fervent desire and respectful reverence, between unbridled passion and judicious wisdom, and between fostering connections among individuals while simultaneously honoring their inherent freedom to forge their own destinies. As the sun ascended higher into the boundless sky, Aphrodite realized the imperative of finding her rightful place amidst the other Olympian deities. She had been born with the inherent knowledge of their existence, immortal beings, each presiding over their own unique domains and possessed of distinct personalities. Yet she also understood that her arrival would inevitably recalibrate the intricate dynamics of their established relationships in ways that no one could possibly foresee. After all, what unforeseen consequences arise when the very goddess of love materializes within a divine family already fraught with its own complex entanglements? What happens when an entity endowed with the power to sway emotions joins a formidable assembly of beings who often struggle to manage their own volatile sentiments? Aphrodite stood poised at the water's edge, her gaze first sweeping across the boundless sea that had cradled her birth, then turning to survey the vast land where her new existence awaited. The gentle wind playfully tousled her golden hair, and roses continued their miraculous bloom around her feet. She was undeniably beautiful, immensely powerful, and eternally immortal. Yet, in a profound sense, she was also utterly alone. She was singular in her essence, the sole being whose very core embodied love itself. How, then, does one forge genuine relationships when one's mere presence automatically colours the affections of others? How does one ascertain whether another's sentiments are truly heartfelt or merely an involuntary response to one's divine nature? These were the profound quandaries that Aphrodite carried with her as she took her initial steps away from the sea and commenced her journey towards Mount Olympus, where the other gods awaited, entirely unaware of the impending arrival of love incarnate. And perhaps these very questions are ones that humanity continues to grapple with in the contemporary era. How do we effectively balance the innate human desire to be loved with the fundamental need to remain authentic to ourselves? How do we truly discern when our profound feelings for another are genuine and deeply rooted, and when they are merely a fleeting reaction to superficial attractions? How do we successfully love others while simultaneously preserving our own intrinsic identity and selfhood? These very questions regarding identity and authenticity now lead us to one of the most terrifying and formidable challenges Zeus ever confronted, a colossal battle that tested not merely his immense strength, but the very legitimacy of his right to govern the cosmos. For sometimes the gravest threats do not emanate from familial treachery or intricate romantic complications, but rather from primordial forces of unadulterated chaotic destruction. By this time, Zeus had successfully orchestrated the overthrow of his tyrannical father, Kronos, liberated his siblings from their gruesome imprisonment within their father's stomach, and firmly established himself as the undisputed sovereign of the gods upon the majestic heights of Mount Olympus. One might reasonably assume this would herald a period of tranquility for Zeus, allowing him to repose and revel in his hard-won victory. Instead, it was precisely at this juncture that Gaia, the primordial earth herself, chose to definitively test whether Zeus truly merited his elevated throne. You see, Gaia, the ancient Earth Mother, had endured the agonizing spectacle of her children and grandchildren engaged in relentless internecine warfare for countless generations. First, Uranus had displayed appalling cruelty towards his offspring. Subsequently, Kronos had violently deposed Uranus. Now Zeus had overthrown Kronos with an equally brutal display of force. Gaia was utterly weary of this incessant cycle of familial violence, and she harboured a particular resentment that Zeus had imprisoned many of her other children, the formidable Titans, within the deepest, most abyssal chasm of the underworld. Consequently, Gaia resolved to forge a champion, a singular entity capable of defeating Zeus once and for all. Her intention was not for this champion to assume Zeus's mantle of authority, but rather to utterly dismantle the cycle of violent power struggles by annihilating the very concept of divine kingship entirely. She retreated to the most profound caverns beneath the earth's surface, where the bedrock remained molten and the very air shimmered with intense heat. There, in a vast subterranean chamber illuminated solely by the infernal glow of underground lava streams, Gaia commenced her most ambitious and fearsome creation ever. She meticulously gathered clay from the deepest ocean trenches, infused it with fire drawn from the earth's fiery core, and breathed into this nascent form the entirety of her incandescent rage, her profound frustration, and her fervent desire for an end to divine tyranny. What ultimately emerged from this primordial process was an entity unlike anything that had ever existed before, and hopefully one that would never again grace existence. His name was Typhon, and he was meticulously engineered to be the perfect anti-god, a living embodiment of cosmic opposition. Imagine the most colossal mountain you have ever beheld. Now conceive of that mountain possessing the ability to move, to think, and to harbour an unyielding, malevolent hatred. Typhon was so gargantuan in stature that when he stood erect, his monstrous head scraped against the distant stars. His eyes blazed with an infernal light, resembling miniature smouldering suns. In lieu of hair, a writhing, venomous tangle of serpents covered his scalp, each capable of delivering a bite potent enough to extinguish the lives of 100 mortals. But perhaps his most terrifying attribute was his hands. From his elbows downwards, instead of conventional arms and hands, Typhon possessed 100 monstrous dragon heads. Each of these heads had the capacity to unleash a distinct form of destruction. Some exhaled scorching fire, others noxious poison gas, and still others a freezing gale capable of instantly transforming living creatures into solid ice. When Typhon first tore himself from the earth's depths, his mere act of standing upright triggered cataclysmic earthquakes across the entirety of the known world. His roar, which emanated not solely from his primary mouth, but also from all 100 of his fearsome dragon-head hands, resonated with such deafening force that it shattered entire mountain ranges and unleashed devastating avalanches thousands of miles distant. The first moment the Olympian deities perceived Typhon's ominous advance, their initial response was not one of courageous defiance. Instead, it was an overwhelming urge to flee with utmost haste and urgency. This was, remarkably, the very pantheon of gods who had previously engaged in successful, arduous conflicts with the primordial Titans, beings who wielded dominion over celestial lightning, seismic tremors, and the abyssal underworld itself. Yet, Typhon presented an entity of a wholly different, more terrifying magnitude. He was not merely a potent adversary, he was the very embodiment of unbridled pandemonium, a force of annihilation motivated by no purpose beyond its own destructive impulse, signifying the absolute unravelling of everything they had meticulously constructed. One after another, the Olympian gods sought refuge in the distant lands of Egypt, assuming various zoomorphic guises to evade the monstrous entity's relentless searching gaze. The radiant Aphrodite transformed into a shimmering fish. The sagacious Apollo manifested as a watchful crow. The huntress Artemis became a lithe cat. Even the formidable Ares, the very deity of warfare, transfigured himself into a formidable boar and sought concealment in the furthest, most secluded corner of the sprawling Nile Delta. However, the sovereign of the gods, Zeus, uniquely refrained from joining the panicked retreat. Not because he was impervious to fear. Indeed, the ancient chronicles unequivocally state that Zeus was overwhelmed by profound dread at Typhon's approach. Rather, he possessed a singular comprehension, a deeper strategic insight that eluded his divine kin. He understood that if he were to abandon this crucial confrontation, if he allowed Typhon to utterly devastate Mount Olympus and obliterate the entire edifice of their divine civilization, then the primordial earth goddess Gaia would realize her ultimate objective. The epoch of divine dominion would irrevocably conclude, and the cosmos would revert to an untamed, formless pandemonium. Consequently, Zeus remained steadfastly positioned upon the loftiest summit of Mount Olympus, celestial bolts of lightning, imbued with immense power, crackling menacingly within his grasp, patiently awaiting Typhon's inevitable arrival. The battle, when it finally commenced, was a cataclysmic engagement unparalleled in the annals of cosmic history. Zeus unleashed torrents of incandescent lightning bolts at Typhon, each discharge possessing an intensity sufficient to permanently blind any mortal observer and a sonic force capable of reverberating across continents. Yet Typhon appeared to register only a negligible impact from the divine onslaught. The lightning strikes merely etched superficial charring upon his formidable stony hide, failing to impede his inexorable progress. Meanwhile, Typhon's 100 serpentine heads spewed forth a terrifying panoply of destructive emanations at Zeus, incendiary blasts capable of liquefying ancient bronze, virulent toxins that blighted vegetation for vast distances, and frigid exhalations that congealed the very atmosphere. Zeus was compelled to deploy every ounce of his supernatural celerity and nimble dexterity merely to evade immediate annihilation in the initial minutes of combat. The titanic struggle persisted with relentless ferocity for an agonizing span of days, then weeks. The incessant peals of Zeus's lightning and the guttural roars emanating from Typhon's myriad heads conspired to generate meteorological upheavals that inundated vast territories. The intense thermal energy radiating from their fierce engagement caused the ancient snowcaps of remote peaks to liquefy. The very terrestrial crust fractured and fissured under the colossal force of their colliding powers. But slowly, a crucial realization dawned upon Zeus. He could not hope to secure victory through sheer might or brute force exclusively. Typhon proved to be an adversary of insurmountable potency, possessing an indomitable resilience and an inexhaustible reservoir of malevolent, annihilating energy. Every time Zeus believed he had secured a momentary upper hand, Typhon would invariably counter with an unforeseen offensive maneuver, compelling Zeus to revert to a perilous defensive posture. It was at this critical juncture that a forgotten piece of counsel, imparted by his venerable grandmother Gaia in ages past, resurfaced in his memory, from a time predating their current adversarial relationship. She had wisely asserted that the fundamental essence of the earth held both immense power and the potential to be weaponized against entities driven by destructive impulses rather than protective stewardship. Consequently, rather than persisting in his futile attempts to directly annihilate Typhon, Zeus pivoted to an entirely novel approach. He began repurposing his formidable lightning bolts not as instruments of direct combat, but as precision-guided implements. He focused his devastating strikes upon the very terrain surrounding Typhon, not with the intent of inflicting immediate harm upon the behemoth, but rather to instigate colossal rockfalls and precipitous avalanches. At first, this strategy initially appeared to be an exercise in futility. Typhon effortlessly cleaved through the descending geological masses as if they were inconsequential gravel. But Zeus, with unwavering persistence, continued his barrage, perpetually triggering fresh landslides, relentlessly amassing stone upon stone, until, by imperceptible increments, the detritus began to encircle and restrict Typhon's lower extremities. This arduous endeavour demanded an additional full week of continuous lightning bombardments from Zeus, but he ultimately succeeded in entombing Typhon to his midsection, within a formidable mass of dislodged rock and geological detritus. Though the monstrous entity continued its furious struggles, spewing forth its destructive emanations from its serpentine heads, its colossal form was now irrevocably immobilized. It was then that Zeus executed his ultimate audacious maneuver. Rather than attempting to achieve the perhaps unattainable feat of slaying Typhon outright, Zeus exercised his formidable dominion over seismic forces to cleave open the very earth beneath the entrapped behemoth. Then, with a singular bolt of lightning, a discharge of cosmic energy surpassing any he had previously unleashed, he caused an entire mountain range to collapse directly upon Typhon. The colossal geological mass that ultimately descended upon and entombed Typhon was none other than the famed Mount Etna, and, as recounted by the venerable Hellenic traditions, Typhon remains perpetually incarcerated beneath its immense weight. Each violent volcanic eruption, they posited, served as a testament to Typhon's enduring presence below, his unquenchable fury, and his ceaseless fiery attempts to rupture his subterranean prison and regain his destructive freedom. What truly distinguishes this epic narrative, however, lies in its profound underlying message. Zeus achieved triumph not through a superiority of raw physical might over Typhon, but through the application of superior intellect and cunning. He secured victory by employing a calculated forbearance over unrestrained force, by devising a meticulous strategy rather than merely escalating a direct confrontation. When the exiled deities eventually made their way back from their Egyptian refuge, they discovered Zeus, though visibly weary, standing triumphant amidst the ravaged remnants of the colossal struggle. They inquired with awe and bewilderment as to how he had succeeded in vanquishing an entity that had instilled such profound terror in each of them. Zeus's reply, delivered with understated wisdom, was remarkably straightforward. My victory did not stem from an overwhelming display of power. I defeated him by my unwavering recollection of the ultimate cause for which I contended. And perhaps this is a resonant lesson that transcends the boundaries of archaic myth and speaks to universal truths. Sometimes the most formidable obstacles encountered in our mortal existence cannot always be surmounted through intensified effort or augmented strength. On occasion, they often necessitate a strategic withdrawal, a period of introspective contemplation, and a clear reaffirmation of our core values and objectives. This profound notion of understanding one's true purpose in conflict seamlessly transitions our narrative focus to a figure of unparalleled renown within the pantheon of Hellenic heroes, and a compelling chronicle illustrating that, on occasion, the most pivotal struggles are waged not against monstrous entities themselves, but against the entrenched societal structures or foundational injustices that engender such horrors. Our journey now diverts from the celestial domains of the gods to the terrestrial sphere of humanity, to the picturesque Aegean island of Crete, where the formidable King Minos held sway, renowned for his sagacity, immense riches, and a horrifying enigma concealed deep within the substructure of his royal abode. This clandestine horror bore the name of the Labyrinth, an architectural marvel of unparalleled intricacy. Conceived and engineered by the legendary artisan Daedalus, it was a vast subterranean complex comprising a bewildering array of serpentine passages, deceptive cul-de-sacs and cunningly wrought false routes, rendering any entrant irrevocably disoriented and lost within moments. And at the very heart of this bewildering edifice resided an abomination that defied natural order, a monstrous being known as the Minotaur. The very genesis of the Minotaur unfolded as a profound tragedy, a direct consequence of divine retribution intertwined with grievous human failings. In a bygone era, King Minos had incurred the wrath of the formidable sea god Poseidon. Poseidon's vengeful decree had manifested as a cruel enchantment, compelling Minos's royal consort to develop an unnatural infatuation with a consecrated bull. From this grotesque and unholy coupling emerged the Minotaur, a hybrid abomination featuring the musculature of a formidable man, conjoined with the head of a bull, endowed with a nascent human intellect, yet perpetually governed by an insatiable, primal hunger. King Minos, consumed by profound shame and revulsion at this living embodiment of his lineage's divine curse, had consequently commissioned Daedalus to construct the labyrinthine prison for the wretched creature, a confinement where it could never effect an escape, yet equally it could never succumb to death, never attain serenity, and was condemned to exist solely as a tormented monstrosity ensnared within perpetual gloom. However, the narrative descends into even greater depths of pathos and cruelty at this juncture. In order to satiate the Minotaur's predatory appetite, King Minos had levied a draconian and horrific tribute upon the proud city-state of Athens. Periodically, every 7 years, Athens was compelled to dispatch 7 youthful men and an equal number of young women to Crete, destined to be thrust into the bewildering confines of the labyrinth, there to be relentlessly pursued and consumed by the ravenous Minotaur. One can only begin to comprehend the profound anguish and terror this decree inflicted upon the families of Athens. Every 7 years, a total of 14 households would be irrevocably shattered by the loss of their beloved offspring to this dreadful destiny. The selection of these unfortunate souls was determined by a pitiless lottery, ensuring that every family harbouring young members endured an omnipresent dread that their own son or daughter might be the next to be tragically chosen. It was precisely amidst this climate of profound despair and injustice that the valiant hero Theseus emerged onto the stage. Though legitimately the scion of King Aegeus of Athens, Theseus had spent his formative years far removed from the regal opulence of the royal court, nurtured instead by his mother in the tranquil confines of a modest coastal settlement. Having but lately arrived in the metropolis and become apprised of his noble lineage, when the grim hour arrived for the dispatch of the third such tribute to Crete, Theseus found himself a horrified eyewitness to this recurring catastrophe for the very first time. He observed the agonizing spectacle as the 14 Athenian youths were arbitrarily selected through the cruel lottery. He witnessed the heart-wrenching lamentations of their kin and perceived the chilling, resigned despondency reflected in the countenances of the chosen victims themselves. He heard the weary pronouncements of the elder citizens who rationalized the situation by asserting its unalterable nature, maintaining that any resistance against King Minos and his bestial enforcer was utterly futile. Yet Theseus, imbued with the unyielding idealism of youth and unburdened by the long-standing capitulation to an intolerable status quo, posed a remarkably direct query. "Why," he challenged, "do we not simply withhold the abhorrent tribute?" The stark reality, he was informed, lay in the overwhelming naval supremacy of King Minos. Should Athens dare to renege on its obligation, Minos would undoubtedly launch a devastating invasion, leading to the utter annihilation of the entire polis. Thus, the grim calculus dictated that the periodic sacrifice of 14 young lives was preferable to imperiling the existence of the entire populace. This pragmatic, albeit horrifying reasoning utterly failed to placate Theseus's sense of justice. Instead, he delivered a declaration that sent shockwaves through the assembled citizens, his own father, King Aegeus, among them. He proclaimed his intention to willingly offer himself as one of the 14 doomed tributes, vowing to personally slay the monstrous Minotaur. King Aegeus was overcome with profound consternation. Having only recently re-established his bond with his long-absent son, the thought of Theseus recklessly squandering his life on what appeared to be an utterly insurmountable endeavour was unbearable. Countless young individuals had already been consigned to the labyrinth's depths throughout the preceding years, and not a single one had ever reappeared. A significant number of these prior victims had even been seasoned combatants. What then gave Theseus the audacity to believe he could achieve triumphs where all others had met with inevitable demise? Theseus's profound response unveiled a crucial aspect of his intrinsic nature. He declared, "Perhaps I cannot vanquish the Minotaur, but I can certainly ensure that I am the final individual to perish in the endeavour." One discerns that Theseus possessed a meticulously crafted strategy that extended far beyond the mere physical confrontation with the monstrous beast. He had diligently immersed himself in all available lore concerning the formidable labyrinth, engaging in discussions with Daedalus's former apprentices, thereby acquiring invaluable insights into its intricate construction and bewildering architectural layout. His conviction was resolute. The true formidable challenge lay not in slaying the Minotaur itself, but rather in successfully navigating an escape from the convoluted maze in the aftermath. Consequently, when the vessel conveying the 14 unfortunate tributes docked in Crete, Theseus was not merely equipped with conventional weaponry. He carried with him a humble, yet profoundly significant ball of silken thread. However, prior to delving into the celebrated stratagem involving the magical thread, an often eclipsed segment of this epic narrative warrants attention. While Theseus meticulously prepared for his inevitable confrontation within the Minotaur's lair, he inadvertently captured the discerning gaze of an unforeseen individual, Ariadne, the regal daughter of the formidable King Minos. Princess Ariadne had matured under the pervasive shadow of the Minotaur's existence, acutely aware of the grim tribute exacted, and the sombre reality of the young lives that vanished into the labyrinth's depths every 7 years. Yet she had never before encountered any of the ill-fated victims. They were invariably sequestered from the royal household, often treated more akin to sacrificial livestock than as sentient human beings. Her initial meeting with Theseus irrevocably altered this detached perspective. For the very first time, she stood face to face with a young man destined for an agonizing demise to satiate her family's monstrous secret. And notably, unlike all his predecessors, Theseus harbored no trace of resignation regarding his dire fate. Instead, he was actively devising a plan for fierce resistance. This unprecedented encounter precipitated a profound moral quandary for Ariadne. She recognized the potential to preserve Theseus's life by assisting him in successfully navigating the treacherous windings of the labyrinth. However, such an act would entail a grave betrayal of her powerful father and conceivably imperil her own royal lineage, should Minos ever uncover her audacious treachery. Ultimately, Ariadne arrived at a momentous decision, one that would indelibly sculpt the trajectory of her remaining years. She concluded that certain societal constructs and systems of oppression were simply too abhorrent to be countenanced or supported, even if actively opposing them necessitated the forfeiture of everything she had ever known or held dear. On the eve preceding Theseus's perilous entry into the bewildering labyrinth, Ariadne, under the cloak of deepest secrecy, paid him a clandestine visit in his desolate cell. She presented him with a most extraordinary gift, an item that Daedalus himself had once bestowed upon her, a miraculous ball of enchanted thread, possessing the inherent property of invariably guiding one back to its initial anchor point, irrespective of how deeply it was unwound into the maze's confounding depths. "Secure one extremity to the entrance," she whispered conspiratorially. "Unfurl it steadily as you penetrate further into the bewildering maze. Once you have vanquished the monstrous creature, simply retrace the thread back to your liberation." Yet her invaluable contribution did not cease there. She also imparted something equally crucial, an intimate, detailed understanding of the Minotaur's peculiar habits and vulnerabilities, knowledge that only someone intimately raised within the palace's confines could possibly possess. The formidable creature, she revealed, attained its peak strength and ferocity during the daytime hours, but became noticeably sluggish and less agile as night descended. It was almost entirely devoid of sight, yet compensated with an extraordinarily acute sense of smell. Furthermore, it possessed sufficient cunning to lay subtle traps. but its inherent pride was such that direct, audacious challenges would invariably provoke it to abandon any strategic thinking in favour of unadulterated brute force. The following morning, with the dawn breaking over Crete, Theseus resolutely stepped into the treacherous maw of the labyrinth. He carried not only Ariadne's vital thread and her invaluable strategic insights, but also the collective hopes and unspoken prayers of every individual who had ever suffered loss under King Minos's unyielding and cruel system of tribute. The labyrinth proved even more profoundly disorienting and psychologically taxing than his most elaborate preparations had anticipated. Its towering walls were meticulously adorned with deceptive false doors and enigmatic, misleading symbols. The labyrinthine corridors twisted, bifurcated, and doubled back upon themselves in patterns that utterly defied any rational or logical comprehension. Even armed with the infallible thread designed to guide his return, Theseus frequently found himself succumbing to confusion regarding his precise direction of travel. Nevertheless, he pressed onward, deeper and deeper into the bewildering heart of the maze, guided by the faint, ominous sound of the Minotaur's heavy breathing and the increasingly potent, sickening aroma of ancient bones and pervasive fear. When, after what seemed an eternity, he finally attained the very nucleus of the labyrinth, Theseus discovered himself within a vast, circular chamber, sparsely illuminated by a solitary, ethereal shaft of sunlight, descending from an immense height above. And there, reposing in a state of slumber against a macabre mound of human remains, lay the legendary Minotaur. It presented a form somewhat smaller than Theseus had envisioned, yet paradoxically it appeared more unsettlingly human. The creature's powerful physique was that of a robust man, heavily scarred from countless previous conflicts, yet still retaining a peculiar, almost feral grace in its dormant posture. Only its head was truly grotesque and utterly monstrous. A colossal bull's head, adorned with horns sharpened to an extreme degree, capable of effortlessly piercing even the most resilient bronze armour. For a fleeting, poignant moment, Theseus faltered in his resolve. This was not merely an unthinking beast, it was also in a tragic sense a victim itself. A creature that had never been granted the agency to choose its own abhorrent existence, condemned forever to perpetual darkness and sustained by a gruesome diet of unwilling, innocent victims. But then an avalanche of memories flooded Theseus's mind, images of all the young, vibrant lives that had been cruelly extinguished within this very chamber. In that instant, he comprehended with chilling clarity that extending mercy to the Minotaur would inevitably perpetuate the cycle of death for countless future innocents. The ensuing confrontation itself, while remarkably swift, was by no means devoid of immense peril or grueling difficulty. The Minotaur fought with the desperate, untamed ferocity of a being that had been unjustly confined for an unbearable span of time. Yet Theseus countered with the unwavering determination of an individual who bore upon his shoulders the collective aspirations and fervent hopes of every soul ever sacrificed to uphold an inherently unjust and tyrannical system. When the arduous struggle finally concluded, Theseus meticulously followed Ariadne's magical thread back through the intricate twisting passages, emerging into the liberating light at the labyrinth's entrance. Behind him he triumphantly led the other 13 Athenian tributes who had been anxiously awaiting near the entrance, barely daring to entertain the fragile hope that rescue was truly within the realm of possibility. However, the saga of Theseus does not culminate with his triumphant departure from the shores of Crete. For the mere act of slaying the monstrous guardian constituted only the initial step in fundamentally transforming the oppressive system that had, in the first place, given rise to such a horror. And therein, perhaps, resides the most profound and enduring lesson imparted by this venerable, ancient narrative. Sometimes the truest manifestation of courage lies not solely in confronting a tangible monster, but rather in undertaking the protracted, arduous labour of constructing a world where the very existence of such monstrous injustices is rendered utterly superfluous. Imagine, if you will, the most extraordinary and perplexing cranial discomfort imaginable in the annals of cosmic history. One awakens on a particular morning to a sensation akin to one's head threatening to cleave asunder. Yet this individual is Zeus, the undisputed sovereign of all Olympian deities, and thus his afflictions, even headaches, are never of an ordinary or mundane nature. This specific morning, high atop the celestial peaks of Mount Olympus, commenced in a manner seemingly identical to countless others. Helios, the resplendent sun god, was just embarking upon his daily journey, guiding his magnificent chariot across the vast expanse of the sky, thereby bathing the gleaming marble columns of the grand divine palace in a soft, ethereal golden luminescence. Zeus, however, had been relentlessly pacing the expansive halls of his majestic abode, one powerful hand pressed firmly against his throbbing forehead, striving with all his divine might to comprehend this peculiar and increasingly potent sensation that had been steadily intensifying for several days. You see, a number of months prior, Zeus had been burdened with a profoundly unsettling prophecy. The Fates, those ancient and enigmatic sisters who meticulously spun the intricate threads of destiny, had whispered a revelation that compelled even the mighty thunder god himself to pause in solemn contemplation. They had foretold that Metis, his inaugural consort and the revered goddess of sagacity, would eventually bear him a progeny destined one day to usurp his supreme authority, precisely as Zeus himself had dislodged his own formidable father, Kronos, from power. Zeus, true to his impulsive and often pragmatic divine character, had undertaken what appeared, at the time, to be the most logical course of action, though to us, in retrospect, it seems quite bizarre. He had, with swift resolve, swallowed Metis whole, under the misguided presumption that this drastic measure would effectively circumvent the fulfillment of the ominous prophecy. However, wisdom, as it unequivocally transpired, is not so easily confined or suppressed. Even within the formidable confines of Zeus's own divine being, Metis continued the extraordinary gestation of their child, and that nascent offspring persistently developed, acquiring knowledge and growing in the most utterly unconventional nursery conceivable. For countless months, Zeus perceived the child's movements, its burgeoning thoughts, and even sensed its intricate crafting activities occurring within the very confines of his cranial cavity. One might reasonably ponder the tactile and auditory experience of having an entity meticulously constructing objects inside one's skull. The distinct, rhythmic sound of tiny hammers striking metal resonated through Zeus's expansive mind both day and night. The child, it appeared, was already engaged in industrious activity, already creating, already diligently preparing itself for its imminent emergence into the external world. This particular morning, however, the peculiar sensation had escalated to an utterly unbearable intensity. Zeus, unable to endure it further, dispatched an urgent summons for Hephaestus, the esteemed god of fire and intricate metalwork, who was also, incidentally, his own son. Hephaestus arrived at the resplendent palace, his formidable bronze axe still radiating warmth from the searing heat of the forge, traces of soot smudged artistically across his powerful, brawny arms, silently questioning the sudden urgency behind his father's summons. "My head," Zeus articulated simply, his voice strained, and Hephaestus, with an innate understanding born of divine kinship, instantly comprehended the gravity of the situation. Gods, after all, possess an inherent faculty for discerning complex truths, without the necessity of lengthy, elaborate explanations. Hephaestus, in fact, had been anticipating this momentous day, having even envisioned its arrival in his bustling workshop, during tranquil afternoon hours when the only sounds permeating the air were the rhythmic, resonant strikes of his hammer upon the anvil. They stood together upon the highest, most commanding balcony of the majestic palace, where the crisp morning air felt exhilaratingly thin and impeccably pure. Far below them, the bustling world of mortal beings proceeded with their quotidian routines, diligent farmers meticulously tending to their verdant olive groves, industrious fishermen patiently mending their intricate nets, and joyous children engaging in boisterous play within sun-drenched, dusty courtyards. None of these unsuspecting mortals possessed the slightest inkling that they were on the precipice of witnessing the extraordinary birth of a powerful new goddess. Hephaestus, with a steady hand, raised his heavy axe aloft, and with one impeccably precise and meticulously calculated strike, he deftly cleaved open Zeus's forehead. The spectacle that unfolded next was so utterly extraordinary, so profoundly astonishing, that even the other assembled deities who had witnessed innumerable strange and wondrous occurrences throughout eternity abruptly ceased their ongoing conversations and stared in collective, awe-struck wonder. From the very core of Zeus's head emerged a fully mature woman, already magnificently arrayed in gleaming, resplendent armour that seemed to have been forged from the very essence of starlight itself. Her ornate helmet brilliantly captured the nascent morning sun, reflecting its golden rays back in a dazzling, effulgent cascade. Her spear was held with perfect, exquisite balance, its point poised, and her formidable shield was polished to an almost mirror-like luminosity. This was Athena, the formidable goddess of profound wisdom and strategic warfare, brought forth into existence not as a vulnerable, helpless infant, but as a complete, fully formed being, instantly prepared to assume her rightful and prominent station among the pantheon of gods. However, what rendered this particular moment even more strikingly remarkable was Athena's very first conscious action, which was not to utter a sound or to make a physical movement, but rather to engage in deep, contemplative thought. One could discern this intellectual process in her penetrating grey eyes, in the deliberate and comprehensive manner in which they absorbed every detail of her immediate surroundings with meticulous consideration. She observed the intricate architectural elements of the palace, discerning the precise spacing of the columns and the underlying structural rationale. She intently watched the graceful interplay of light as it traversed the expansive marble floors, immediately grasping the complex mathematical principles that governed its movement, When she finally articulated her first words, her voice was imbued with a serene calm and an unwavering measuredness. Father, she addressed Zeus, her tone resonating with newfound understanding. I now fully comprehend the profound wisdom behind my secure containment within your thoughts. The world indeed holds a vast amount of essential work that demands my attention. Zeus, gently massaging his now miraculously healed forehead, responded with a radiant smile, a profound mixture of immense relief and overwhelming paternal pride. The genesis of Athena, a tale woven into the very fabric of ancient Greek mythology, holds a particular fascination, for it vividly illustrates the paramount virtues esteemed by that civilization. Her emergence was not sparked by fleeting ardour or a capricious twist of fate, but rather sprang directly from the realm of pure intellect. The goddess burst forth, fully mature and perfectly formed, a profound symbol of how genuine wisdom does not unfold in hesitant stages. Instead, it arrives in its entirety, comprehensively equipped to confront and master any complex challenges that may lie ahead. In the immediate aftermath of her extraordinary birth, Athena embarked upon an exploration of the Olympian realm. She moved with an eager curiosity akin to one encountering the world's marvels for the very first time, yet simultaneously possessed a profound understanding, as if she had been meticulously contemplating these phenomena for countless months. Her journey led her to the smoky workshop of Hephaestus, where she absorbed the intricate principles of metallurgy, the precision of crafting, and the robust art of construction. She engaged in profound discourse with Apollo, delving into the ethereal realms of music and poetry, instantly grasping the symbiotic relationship between rhythm and meter in the creation of sublime aesthetic beauty. However, it was the vibrant, often tumultuous world of mortals below that captivated her attention most profoundly. From her majestic celestial vantage point, she observed nascent cities grappling with the monumental task of self-governance, their inhabitants striving to disentangle complex legal dilemmas and establish equitable systems of administration, while dedicated artisans tirelessly endeavoured to perfect their specialized crafts. It became unequivocally clear that this earthly sphere was where her unique wisdom would be most crucially required. The inaugural city chosen by Athena for her benevolent intervention was one destined to immortalize her name, Athens. Its citizens were deeply engaged in fervent debates concerning the optimal structure for their burgeoning society and the formulation of decisions that would ensure universal equity. Athena observed their earnest deliberations with keen interest, noting the inherent difficulties they faced in resolving questions that often defied straightforward answers. She manifested herself among them, not as an imposing, conquering deity, but rather as an unassuming teacher in the bustling central square of the city. There she patiently demonstrated the foundational arts of pottery, the intricate craft of weaving, and the enduring practice of olive cultivation. These were not arbitrary skills, each embodied a distinct facet of profound wisdom. Pottery instilled the virtue of patience and the fundamental understanding that objects of enduring utility and beauty could be meticulously shaped from the most common earth. Weaving elucidated how disparate individual threads, when methodically organized and skillfully interwoven, coalesce to form a fabric far stronger and more aesthetically rich than any single strand could ever be, and perhaps most significantly, olive cultivation exemplified the imperative of long-term strategic thinking. Given that olive trees demand years of patient nurturing before they yield their bounteous harvest of food and oil, sustaining generations, the diligent populace of Athens assimilated these invaluable lessons with remarkable alacrity. They began to perceive their burgeoning city not merely as a geographical location where they happened to reside, but as a dynamic entity that they could actively shape, refine, and elevate through concentrated thought and persistent, dedicated effort. This shift in perspective catalyzed the development of innovative governmental structures, novel methodologies for collective decision-making, and progressive educational paradigms that placed a premium on lucid analytical problem-solving. Intriguingly, Athena's profound influence did not remain confined within the walls of Athens. News of the enlightened wisdom being practiced within the city's confines spread, prompting other city-states to dispatch their own representatives to learn and observe. These eager visitors would subsequently return to their homelands, laden with a wealth of fresh insights concerning architectural design, the sophisticated organization of societies, and innovative approaches to resolving contentious disputes through reasoned discussion rather than brute force. Yet, Athena, in her boundless humility, never sought personal acclaim for these widespread improvements. When individuals offered their heartfelt gratitude, she would gently remind them that the wellspring of wisdom had resided within them all along. Her role, she explained, had merely been to assist them in organizing their latent thoughts, much as her own miraculous birth had represented the meticulous organization of Zeus's scattered ideas into a coherent, purposeful, and fully realized form. This narrative of Athena's genesis invites contemplation on the nature of wisdom itself. It prompts reflection on how often the most profound insights and solutions do not arrive from external sources, but rather from the careful organization of inherent knowledge and dormant ideas. One might ponder the countless concepts incubating within human consciousness at any given moment, awaiting the opportune instant to manifest in their complete, perfected forms. Indeed, the tale subtly suggests that much wisdom, quietly developing in the background of the mind, lies poised to emerge, offering clarity and a fresh perspective on the world. Building upon that profound consideration of wisdom and the true essence of what humanity genuinely values, the narrative now shifts to recount the poignant story of a monarch who believed he possessed an infallible understanding of his desires, only to discover that the fulfillment of one's deepest wishes does not invariably bestow the blessing one initially envisions. King Midas held dominion over Phrygia, a kingdom gracefully situated in what is now recognized as modern-day Turkey. This verdant land was characterized by undulating hills, generously dotted with ancient olive groves and flourishing vineyards. His grand palace afforded sweeping vistas of expansive valleys, where venerable shepherds guided their flocks along time-worn paths and industrious merchants traversed dusty thoroughfares transporting valuable commodities from distant, exotic lands. It was, by all accounts, a tranquil and sufficiently prosperous realm. Nevertheless, Midas frequently found himself gazing upon his treasury, an ever-present glint in his eye, and harbouring an insatiable longing for it to contain even greater riches. Indeed, King Midas had cultivated what could accurately be described as a compulsive fascination with accumulation. Each morning, immediately after partaking of his morning repast of delicate honey cakes and fresh goat's milk, he would purposefully descend the cool stone steps leading to his subterranean treasure room. There, with an almost ritualistic devotion, he would run his fingers through towering piles of gleaming silver coins, carefully lift golden cups to catch the dancing lamplight, and meticulously arrange precious gems into perfectly aligned rows. The rhythmic, almost musical, clicking and clinking sounds of metal and stone became a peculiar kind of symphony to his ears, the very melody of immense wealth. Yet, as Midas would soon discover, wealth possessed a strangely paradoxical quality. The more one amassed, the more acutely one became aware of what remained beyond one's grasp. His treasury, which had once appeared magnificently overflowing, began to feel disappointingly meagre when placed in comparison to the legendary fortunes whispered about in other illustrious kingdoms. He devoured tales of Egyptian pharaohs whose sepulchres were laden with unimaginable quantities of gold, of Persian kings whose crowns were adorned with gemstones the size of avian eggs, and of powerful merchants who commanded entire fleets of ships, each vessel laden with incalculable treasure. One particularly balmy afternoon, as Midas ambled through his fragrant rose garden, attempting to dislodge these persistent golden thoughts from his mind, he perceived an unusual disturbance near the garden's ornate fountain. His vigilant guards had stumbled upon an individual slumbering amidst the vibrant roses, an elderly man, whose hair was entwined with leaves and whose simple tunic bore the telltale stains of wine. This was Silenus, a jovial satyr and a cherished companion to the revered god Dionysus. Silenus, having indulged a little too enthusiastically in the previous night's festivities, had inadvertently strayed from Dionysus's boisterous procession and eventually succumbed to a deep slumber within the regal confines of Midas's garden. Most monarchs might have reacted with annoyance at the discovery of an uninvited stranger within their private domains, but Midas, ever curious, found himself intrigued by this peculiar visitor. For a full 10 days Midas extended the utmost courtesy and hospitality to Silenus, treating him as an honoured guest. They shared sumptuous meals upon the palace terrace, observing the sun's majestic descent as it painted the distant mountains in breathtaking hues of gold and purple. Silenus, in turn, regaled the king with enchanting anecdotes of his extensive travels alongside Dionysus, captivating tales of vibrant festivals in far-off cities, of vineyards that produced wines so exquisitely sweet they could move mortals to tears of pure joy, and of joyous celebrations that stretched uninterrupted from one new moon to the next. What resonated most deeply with Midas from these myriad stories was their consistent theme. They were never about the accumulation of material possessions, but rather about the profound experience of ephemeral moments. Silenus spoke of perfect evenings where the harmony of music and the peals of laughter seemed to elevate individuals beyond their mundane concerns, of simple meals rendered magical by the warmth of shared friendship, and of dances that continued until the first blush of dawn, simply because no one wished for the boundless joy to ever cease. When Dionysus eventually arrived to reclaim his cherished companion, he was so profoundly pleased by Midas's gracious hospitality that he magnanimously offered the king any reward his heart desired. Anything at all, Dionysus declared, his eyes sparkling with that particular brand of mischievous amusement that gods sometimes exhibit when they anticipate mortals are on the verge of making remarkably interesting blunders. Without a moment's hesitation, Midas articulated his fervent wish. "Grant me the power that everything I touch transforms into gold." Dionysus, with a subtly raised eyebrow, inquired if Midas was absolutely certain this was his true desire. The king nodded with eager enthusiasm, his mind already conjuring vivid images of the satisfying weight of golden coins, the brilliant gleam of golden statues, and the boundless shimmering wealth that would soon be unequivocally his. Dionysus granted the audacious wish with a gesture that appeared almost nonchalant, as if merely swatting away a bothersome fly. "It is done," he pronounced with simple finality, and then he and Silenus departed, leaving Midas utterly alone, armed with his newly acquired formidable power. The initial trial of his newfound ability was a modest one. Midas extended his hand and made contact with a delicate rose blooming in his garden. Instantly, the velvety petals transmuted, becoming hard, lustrous gold. The transformation, in its own peculiar way, possessed a striking beauty. Every intricate detail of the flower was perfectly preserved, every graceful curve of every petal captured immutably in precious metal. Yet the rose no longer exuded its sweet fragrance. It no longer swayed gently with the caress of the breeze. It had become a flawless, yet utterly lifeless replica of its former vibrant self. Nevertheless, Midas was utterly exhilarated. He strode through his magnificent palace, his hands reaching out to touch everything within his grasp. Chairs became resplendent golden chairs. Curtains were transformed into shimmering golden draperies. Even the very stones beneath his feet turned to solid gold with each deliberate step he took. By evening, his entire palace had been transformed into something plucked directly from a fantastical dream. Every surface gleamed, every object was precious, everything was now worth more than the combined treasures of entire kingdoms. The true genesis of his troubles, however, began at dinner time. Midas, utterly exhausted from his day of relentless golden transformation, settled down to partake of a meal. He reached for a plump grape, and it instantly solidified into hard, inedible gold between his fingers. He attempted to drink from his goblet of wine, but the liquid instantly congealed into a metallic substance the very moment it touched his lips. Bread, luscious honey, even pure water, everything he attempted to consume became unpalatable gold the instant his touch fell upon it. That first harrowing night, Midas lay restless in his opulent golden bed, surrounded by golden pillows, his gaze fixed upon his shimmering golden ceiling, his stomach cramping with the gnawing pangs of hunger. The bitter irony of his situation was not lost upon him. He was, in all likelihood, the wealthiest individual in the entire world, yet he found himself utterly unable to afford the simple sustenance of a basic meal. But the ultimate, most profound heartbreak descended upon him the following morning when his beloved daughter, Zoe, ran to greet him with her customary morning exuberance. She was the absolute joy and pride of his life, a vivacious 10-year-old who filled the expansive palace with her infectious laughter and an endless stream of curious questions about every new discovery. Without a moment's conscious thought, Midas instinctively reached out to embrace her, just as he did every single day. The transformation was instantaneous and tragically irreversible. One moment, Zoe was sprinting towards him, her youthful face radiant with the joy of a new morning, and the next she stood before him, a perfect gleaming golden statue frozen eternally in mid-stride. Her expression of happy anticipation was preserved with exquisite fidelity, but she could no longer utter a single word, no longer laugh, no longer pose the countless delightful questions that had brought Midas more profound pleasure than any treasure could ever hope to provide. King Midas collapsed onto the cold floor next to the petrified, gilded effigy of his beloved daughter Zoe. A torrent of tears cascaded down his cheeks as a dreadful clarity finally dawned upon him regarding the true cost of his ill-conceived wish. The entirety of the world's precious metals paled in significance when contrasted with the simple, living touch of Zoe's hand in his own. He yearned for the sound of her cheerful morning greeting, "Good morning, Papa," and her animated descriptions of the avian visitors she observed from her chamber window. For 3 agonizing days the monarch remained prostrate beside his daughter's immobile golden likeness, his body refusing nourishment, his mind denying restful slumber, perpetually haunted by the resonant echoes of his solitary footsteps, traversing corridors that, while aesthetically opulent, had become utterly devoid of life. Every object his gaze encountered served as a stark, painful memento of his immense sacrifice. The once vibrant golden roses now stood as perpetual, metallic sculptures, forever incapable of blossoming. The bounteous golden fruit trees would never again offer their cooling shade or life-sustaining produce. His resplendent golden palace, once a symbol of his power, had transformed into an exquisite, yet desolate mausoleum. Eventually, driven by an unbearable anguish, Midas sought out the riverbank where Dionysus had previously indicated his presence could be found. Should the king ever require divine intervention, the god of wine and revelry appeared to anticipate this precise moment, awaiting Midas with an air of prescience. He displayed no astonishment at the sight of the king, whose countenance was now visibly gaunt and etched with profound desperation. "My actions were utterly misguided," Midas confessed with uncharacteristic brevity, his voice heavy with contrition. "I implore you, revoke this so-called blessing. I would willingly endure the existence of the most impoverished individual on earth, rather than remain the wealthiest man incapable of holding his own child in his arms." Dionysus responded with a slow, deliberate nod, his expression conveying what appeared to be a profound yet gentle empathy. "Immerse yourself in the flowing waters of the river Pactolus," he directed, his tone calm and authoritative. "Its currents will cleanse you of the gilded affliction, and you shall possess the ability to revert all that you have transmuted by merely sprinkling its revitalizing liquid upon them." Midas, without a moment's hesitation, sprinted towards the designated river and, fully clad, plunged headlong into its cool embrace. The profound sense of liberation that enveloped him as the burdensome power receded was an emotion utterly beyond articulation. He meticulously filled various receptacles with the potent river water and hastened back to his desolate palace, meticulously applying the liquid to every object his touch had altered, reserving his cherished daughter for the final, most momentous act, for he harboured a profound apprehension, almost fearing the possibility of genuine hope. Yet, the instant the sacred water made contact with Zoe's shimmering golden figure, a vibrant resurgence of colour and vital warmth surged back into her, akin to the glorious dawning sun illuminating an entire valley. Her inaugural gasp of breath, her initial flutter of eyelids, her first bewildered inquiry regarding the peculiar stiffness she felt. These were auditory sensations that resonated with a beauty and preciousness far surpassing any musical composition ever conceived in Midas's world. Later that same evening, as father and daughter partook of a humble repast, consisting merely of bread and olives, Zoe innocently inquired of her father why he appeared so profoundly altered, so remarkably more engaged with every utterance she made. Midas, with newfound wisdom, recounted the profound narrative of wishes and their often unforeseen repercussions, elucidating the crucial distinction between superficial desires and the genuine sources of profound contentment. From that pivotal day onward, King Midas's royal coffers maintained a modest accumulation of riches, a deliberate departure from his former avarice. However, his profound gratitude for every single possession, no matter how small, expanded beyond measure. He now keenly observed the delicate interplay of morning light as it graced Zoe's countenance during their breakfast. He deeply relished the unadulterated flavours of unpretentious sustenance, shared in the cherished company of those he held dear. He dedicated countless hours to dialogues that, while generating no material wealth, nevertheless imbued his daily existence with a profound and enduring significance. Law dictates that the venerable river Pactolus to this very day continues to transport minute particles of gold within its current, a legacy attributed not to Midas's transient transformative touch, but rather to the profound wisdom gleaned at its banks concerning life's authentic priorities. Occasionally, in the hushed stillness of the late hours, when the world around grows quiescent, one might find their thoughts gravitating towards their own aspirations, contemplating the fundamental disparity between superficial shimmer and genuine life enrichment, which unassuming delights perhaps have been inadvertently disregarded in the relentless quest for possessions perceived as more valuable. What invaluable instances of human communion patiently await recognition and profound appreciation, proving themselves infinitely more precious than any material gold. Speaking of treasures lost and found, let us drift now toward a story that has puzzled minds for thousands of years. The tale of Atlantis, a city so advanced, so beautiful, and so proud that it vanished beneath the waves in a single day and night. Envision, for a moment, an insular nation situated far beyond the famed Pillars of Hercules, a geographical marker now commonly recognized as the Strait of Gibraltar. This was no mere landmass, rather, it was a realm where human inventiveness had manifested marvels that verged on the miraculous. The metropolis of Atlantis itself was meticulously constructed in a series of flawless concentric circles, each distinct ring delineated by shimmering canals that caught the Mediterranean sun like an array of precious gemstones. The inhabitants of Atlantis claimed direct lineage from Poseidon, the formidable deity of the sea. Their progenitor, Atlas, had been bestowed with sovereign rule over this idyllic island, and his progeny had subsequently inherited both his profound sagacity and an intrinsic bond with the vast ocean that encircled their domain. For countless generations, these Atlanteans coexisted in profound equilibrium with the maritime world, their vessels journeying to remote shores not as instruments of subjugation, but as emissaries of commerce and enlightenment. The true distinction of Atlantis lay not solely in its immense prosperity, although the city undeniably harboured treasures of unimaginable abundance. The genuine marvel resided in the sophisticated manner by which the Atlanteans had structured their entire civilization. They had meticulously devised governmental frameworks that artfully harmonized individual liberties with a profound sense of communal obligation. Their esteemed educational institutions imparted not only essential practical proficiencies, but also profound philosophical tenets and rigorous ethical considerations. Furthermore, their bustling marketplaces functioned upon immutable principles of equity, guaranteeing that every citizen possessed equitable access to the fundamental necessities of life. The very architectural fabric of Atlantis served as a mirror to this pervasive societal equilibrium. The innermost concentric ring encompassed the regal palace and sacred temples, structures meticulously fashioned from resplendent white, profound black, and vivid red stone, all sourced directly from the island's own rich quarries. These edifices transcended mere utility. They were conceived with the express purpose of evoking profound inspiration in all who beheld them, their meticulously balanced proportions instilling a pervasive atmosphere of serenity and awe. The intermediate rings accommodated lush gardens and expansive gymnasiums, designated spaces where the citizenry could cultivate both their physical prowess and intellectual faculties. The outermost circumference, in contrast, housed the bustling workshops and vital harbours where the essential pragmatic operations of the flourishing city were diligently conducted. Nevertheless, it was arguably the unparalleled engineering accomplishments that truly commanded the greatest admiration. The Atlanteans had ingeniously fashioned an intricate network of bridges and subterranean passages that seamlessly linked all the concentric segments of the city, thereby facilitating the remarkably efficient transit of both individuals and commodities across the entire urban expanse. They had pioneered sophisticated techniques for climate regulation, ensuring that their magnificent structures maintained an agreeable temperature throughout the entire calendar year. Furthermore, their expansive harbours were expertly equipped to receive vessels from every corner of the then-known world, featuring advanced mechanical apparatuses that rendered the processes of loading and unloading merchandise extraordinarily rapid and utterly secure. For a great many centuries, this meticulously crafted societal framework functioned with remarkable efficacy and grace. Atlantean voyagers venturing to far-flung territories returned laden with invaluable knowledge, intricate mathematical principles gleaned from Babylon, precise astronomical data acquired from Egypt, and profound philosophical concepts emanating from the nascent Greek city-states. Crucially, rather than merely assimilating these external notions, the Atlanteans masterfully interwove them with their indigenous traditions, forging profound intellectual syntheses that proved inherently more potent and comprehensive than the mere aggregation of their individual components. The critical juncture, however, arrived with insidious gradualness, unfolding so imperceptibly that the vast majority of Atlanteans remained oblivious to its unfolding. Prosperity, it appears, harbours inherent perils. As the city-state ascended to ever greater levels of affluence, its inhabitants progressively began to regard their remarkable accomplishments as mere entitlements, rather than the fruits of diligent effort. The intricate systems that had once demanded meticulous upkeep and unwavering vigilance were now presumptuously considered self-perpetuating. The foundational principles that had guided preceding generations started to appear antiquated, perceived as superfluous limitations upon what was now conceived as boundless potential. Subsequently, a fresh cohort of leaders ascended to prominence, individuals who had matured amidst the splendors of Atlantis without ever having to exert themselves in their creation. They surveyed their impeccably ordered metropolis and concluded that the era for expansion had arrived. It was, in their view, time to disseminate Atlantis's purportedly superior methodologies throughout the global community, irrespective of whether other nations desired such imposition. These burgeoning leaders commenced articulating notions of Atlantis's manifest destiny, emphasizing its perceived obligation to shepherd less developed cultures. They consequently engineered military apparatuses that rivaled the sophistication of their earlier, benevolent technological advancements. Their once welcomed vessels, which had previously entered foreign harbours as conveyors of commerce and erudition, now commenced their arrivals as ominous precursors of subjugation and domination. The insidious transformation became palpable, even within the quotidian rhythms of the city. The venerable forums where citizens had formerly converged to engage in robust policy debates devolved into mere venues for the unilateral pronouncement of governmental decrees. The esteemed educational institutions progressively shifted their pedagogical emphasis from profound ethical deliberation towards a narrower focus on technical instruction. Concurrently, the bustling workshops, once dedicated to crafting items of aesthetic appeal and practical benefit, redirected their efforts primarily towards the fabrication of armaments and instruments of societal regulation. Yet the Olympian deities, and most notably the supreme god Zeus, observed these unfolding developments with an escalating apprehension. The Atlanteans had initially been endowed with their extraordinary endowments as a grand experiment into the boundless reaches of human capability. What might humanity accomplish if afforded optimal circumstances and celestial tutelage? This profound experiment, however, was demonstrably faltering, not as a consequence of external duress or unforeseen cataclysms, but rather due to the self-destructive decisions being made by the Atlanteans themselves. Zeus, recognizing the gravity of the situation, convened a solemn council of the gods to deliberate upon the appropriate course of action. Some divine voices advocated for direct intervention, proposing the dispatch of ominous portents and stern admonitions that might yet steer Atlantis back to its foundational principles. Others contended that the experiment ought to proceed unimpeded, positing that even a catastrophic failure could impart invaluable lessons. Nevertheless, Zeus ultimately determined that Atlantis had evolved into a menace not merely to its neighboring civilizations, but to the delicate equilibrium of the entire global order. The ultimate demise arrived with terrifying abruptness. Within the span of a single day and night, characterized by cataclysmic seismic tremors and devastating inundations, Atlantis was inexorably swallowed by the surging ocean. The meticulously engineered canals, once conduits for internal navigation, transformed into furious ingress points for the encroaching sea. The majestic edifices, conceived to endure for eternity, fractured and collapsed under the assault of forces far exceeding their architects' most pessimistic estimations. The formidable fleet of ships, which had been poised to project Atlantean dominion across the globe, was reduced to shattered fragments, strewn haphazardly across the abyssal ocean floor. Yet it is this particular aspect that elevates the narrative of Atlantis beyond a mere account of divine retribution. It also encompasses profound themes of collective memory and invaluable learning. While the obliteration was absolute, the accumulated wisdom was not entirely eradicated. A contingent of Atlanteans had been engaged in voyages abroad when the catastrophic event occurred. Others had years prior relocated to far-flung colonial settlements. These fortunate survivors bore with them not merely their advanced technical expertise, but also the enduring recollection of their civilization's zenith, and crucially, the tragic reasons for its precipitous downfall. The scattered remnants of Atlantean wisdom profoundly shaped the progression of various burgeoning cultures across the ancient world. Their profound mathematical insights permeated Babylonian astronomy, influencing celestial observations and calculations. Architectural principles, remarkable in their sophistication, were visibly manifested within the monumental structures of Egyptian civilization. Furthermore, the advanced philosophical ideas fostered the intellectual efflorescence of Greek thought, contributing to its depth and breadth. However, the Atlantean survivors exercised meticulous discernment, disseminating solely the constructive aspects of their profound heritage, while carefully preserving and perpetuating the cautionary tales concerning unchecked pride and the insidious abuse of power. This discerning approach explains why Plato, centuries subsequent to Atlantis' supposed demise, chronicled its story not as a historian meticulously recording verifiable facts, but rather as a profound philosopher delving into abstract concepts and universal truths. He masterfully employed this evocative narrative to scrutinize inquiries that held as much pertinence for classical Athens as they resonate profoundly with contemporary society. What transpires, for instance, when a civilization's technological capabilities and material prowess far outstrip its collective wisdom and ethical grounding? How does humanity endeavor to uphold the intrinsic values that initially propelled its success, once that very success becomes an ubiquitous and unexamined norm? What profound responsibilities are inherently entwined with the wielding of power, whether exercised by an individual or by an entire collective entity? The physical landmass of Atlantis may have indeed vanished beneath the tumultuous waves, yet its profound significance persistently emerges in novel manifestations. Every civilization that has achieved truly remarkable feats has, at some pivotal juncture, encountered the identical dilemma that confronted the Atlanteans, whether to utilize their unparalleled achievements as instruments for constructive progress and societal amelioration, or as armaments for oppressive subjugation and domination. As one settles into slumber tonight, one might contemplate the miniature Atlantises within one's personal existence. What intricate systems and cherished relationships have individuals meticulously constructed that now demand careful, consistent cultivation to sustain their intrinsic vitality and health? What ethical principles truly dictate one's crucial decisions when prosperity encourages the tempting, often perilous illusion that established norms and moral rules have ceased to apply to one's elevated status? Perhaps the most invaluable endowment is not merely the tangible creations and impressive structures individuals build, but rather the sagacity and foresight to preserve what matters most deeply about those accomplishments, ensuring their enduring positive legacy. The narrative now transitions from the contemplation of vanished cities to the profound concept of recurring transformations. The perpetual rhythm that orchestrates shadow and illumination, demise and resurgence, the culmination that invariably heralds a fresh commencement. This is the ancient story that elucidates the genesis of the seasons and illuminates why. Sometimes the most indispensable expeditions frequently lead individuals furthest from their familiar abodes and comfortable routines. Persephone was the cherished daughter of Demeter, the venerable goddess of the harvest, and she had matured amidst the uninterrupted profusion that her divine mother ceaselessly created. Their blissful home was nestled within a verdant valley where a perennial springtime appeared to reign supreme. Blossoms perpetually unfurled in vibrant hues. Arboreal boughs consistently yielded their bountiful fruits, and agricultural expanses remained perpetually primed for gathering. It was undeniably a place of exquisite beauty, yet perhaps excessively sheltered, somewhat unduly flawless for someone young, spirited, and inherently curious about the wider, more complex world beyond its serene confines. Persephone spent her carefree days roaming across verdant pastures with her companions, the graceful ocean nymphs who had been her lifelong confidants since childhood. Together they would collect blossoms, entwine delicate diadems from tendrils of vines, recount enchanting narratives, and engage in pastimes whose sole aim was unadulterated delight and innocent joy. It was, by all accounts, an idyllic existence. But lately, Persephone had been experiencing a peculiar disquietude, a deep-seated sense that there were profound experiences and invaluable cognition awaiting beyond the protected confines of her mother's valley. She had begun posing challenging inquiries to Demeter, questions that noticeably made the harvest goddess uncomfortable. What mysterious forces, for instance, lay beneath the earth that enabled plants to grow with such vigour? Why did certain seeds necessitate burial in darkness before they could aspire and reach toward the light? What happened to the crucial part of the cyclical process that her mother never addressed? The dying that seemed to be an indispensable precursor to any true rebirth. Demeter invariably deflected the discourse whenever these challenging conversations arose. She had endeavoured assiduously to fashion a domain where her beloved daughter would never have to encounter loss or suffering of any kind. The very notion that Persephone might be investigating these more sombre yet fundamental facets of being profoundly disquieted her. Consequently, Demeter intensified her safeguarding attentiveness, ensuring that her daughter's days were meticulously filled with pleasant, distracting activities designed to divert her attention from such unsettling contemplations. But Hades, the solemn lord of the underworld, had been observing Persephone from his remote dominion. He had perceived her inquisitive disposition, her profound discontent with facile responses, and her inherent bravery in posing difficult existential inquiries. Unlike her protective mother, he did not perceive these attributes as problematic. Rather, he deemed them commendable and worthy of admiration. Here, he mused, was someone who might truly comprehend that shadow and illumination functioned as collaborators, not adversaries, within the grand choreography of being. The day everything irrevocably changed commenced in an unremarkable fashion, much like any other. Persephone was gathering flowers with her companions in a meadow that seemed exceptionally lovely on that particular morn. The grass felt yielding beneath their soles, and the air was balmy and fragrant with the sweet perfume of nascent narcissus. Persephone found herself irresistibly captivated by a singular bloom, a narcissus that appeared exceedingly vivid compared to its counterparts, its corolla ensnaring the solar rays in an almost mesmerizing fashion. As she bent to pick this extraordinary flower, the terrestrial surface cleaved abruptly beneath her. But instead of plummeting, she found herself being tenderly elevated by unseen forces conveyed downwards through strata of earth and lithos into subterranean grottos that gleamed with precious stones and metallic riches. The journey was undoubtedly terrifying, yes, but simultaneously magnificent and awe-inspiring. She was seeing parts of the world that no mortal soul had ever previously encountered or experienced. She arrived in the underworld, not in the capacity of a captive, but as an esteemed visitor within a regal abode surpassing any edifice she had conceived in her sheltered life. The majestic corridors were sculpted from obsidian marble, interlaced with argent streaks, illuminated by ethereal infernos that cast no chiaroscuro and emitted warmth devoid of effluvium. Botanical enclaves also flourished within this subterranean realm, yet they diverged profoundly from any found in the terrestrial sphere. Flora that blossomed in obscurity, arboreal specimens yielding argent and auric fruits, and blossoms that vocalized gentle harmonies rather than exuding perfume. Hades greeted her with formal courtesy, explaining that he had brought her here not out of egoism or selfish desire, but from a profound conviction that she alone possessed the capacity to genuinely comprehend both dimensions of existence, the vibrant domain of burgeoning life and plenitude above, and the enigmatic sphere of repose and metamorphosis beneath. He extended an invitation to reveal the intricate mechanisms of his sovereignty, the very apparatuses that facilitated regeneration in the terrestrial realm. What Persephone subsequently saw profoundly contravened all prior instruction she had received concerning mortality and cessation. The underworld, she realized, was not a punitive locale, but an extensive circulatory mechanism where spirits found repose and underwent revitalization betwixt incarnations. She observed the methodology through which the vital force of concluded existences was transmuted into the latent capacity for nascent development. She acquired knowledge regarding the meticulous equilibrium indispensable for upholding the viability of surface life. Meanwhile, in the upper world, Demeter had ascertained her progeny's vanishing and was overcome with frenzied sorrow and unyielding fury. In her profound grief, she forswore her responsibilities as the harvest deity, traversing the terrestrial sphere in a desperate, relentless quest for Persephone. Without Demeter's divine attention, agricultural yields commenced their precipitous decline. Arboricultural specimens ceased their fructification. Even the verdure started to shrivel and perish across the land. The perpetual vernal epoch of Demeter's realm yielded to an unprecedented global phenomenon. Stark frigidity, an era of dearth and anxious anticipation. Humanity commenced experiencing dire hardship as provisions grew scant, and the terrestrial globe itself appeared to retract its essential sustenance for life. Mortals prayed fervently to the gods for help, but Demeter was impervious to their entreaties. She vowed not to reinstate plenitude and growth until her beloved offspring was reinstated to her care. Zeus, observing this escalating predicament with growing concern, ultimately interposed. He dispatched Hermes, the swift divine herald, to parley with Hades regarding Persephone's reinstatement. But when Hermes arrived in the underworld, he encountered an intricate predicament. Persephone had indeed eaten food of the underworld, not due to deception or coercion, but rather owing to her deliberate decision to sample a modest quantity of pomegranate arils, thus embracing the ramifications of that volition. More importantly, Persephone had discovered that she no longer desired to revert to her former existence indefinitely. The erudition acquired within the chthonic realm had transformed her profoundly. She comprehended at last the genesis of her prior disquietude in her mother's protected valley. She had been perceiving the inherent partiality of encountering merely a singular facet of life's perpetual gyre. The resolution forged through diplomatic discourse appeased all parties, yet necessitated concession from each. Persephone would devote a segment of every annum to residing in the chthonic realm alongside Hades, assimilating the arcana of mortality and metamorphosis. The remainder of the year she would reascend to the terrestrial sphere, bearing with her the sagacity acquired from the subterranean domain. When Persephone returned for her first reunion with Demeter, both maternal figure and offspring had been fundamentally altered by their period of estrangement. Demeter had learned that her custodial affection, when extended to its utmost, possessed the capacity to transform into a self-imposed confinement, limiting growth rather than fostering it. Persephone, in turn, had gained erudition that rendered her a more holistic individual, one who apprehended both felicity and lamentation, burgeoning and repose, commencement and cessation. Their reunion miraculously reinstated plenitude to the terrestrial globe. Yet this profusion differed from its predecessor, exhibiting greater intricacy, enhanced durability, and heightened verisimilitude. The global environment now underwent seasonal transitions, epochs of prosperity interchanged with intervals of paucity. Spans of development were succeeded by phases of dormancy. This new reality did not constitute a punitive measure or a deprivation, but rather a more sophisticated apprehension of cyclical dynamics. During the months when Persephone dwelt above ground, the terrestrial surface flourished with vernal efflorescence and prospered throughout the estival months. During her subterranean sojourn, autumn heralded the gathering of crops, and winter afforded a period of recuperation. Agriculturists assimilated how to collaborate with these periodic fluctuations instead of resisting them, accumulating surplus from the cultivation season to sustain themselves throughout the fallow periods. The profoundest boon bestowed by Persephone's arduous odyssey was the invaluable sagacity she carried back concerning the indispensable nature of challenging experiences. She had come to comprehend that certain forms of personal development are exclusively attainable amidst adversity, that particular strengths coalesce solely through confronting formidable trials, and that deep understanding only blossoms from the intertwined experiences of sorrow and subsequent renewal. Consequently, she emerged as a guiding beacon for mortals navigating their own inevitable descents, those critical junctures when existence itself summoned them to forsake accustomed ease and venture into unfamiliar, often daunting domains. Her compelling narrative served as a potent reminder that such expeditions, regardless of their initial intimidating facade, frequently culminated in profound revelations that left the voyagers more integrated, significantly more capable, and profoundly more alive. The ancient Hellenic storytellers, in recounting this myth, demonstrated a keen insight into the intricate process of human maturation. They recognized that individuals cannot perpetually linger within the sheltered sanctuaries of early childhood. True adulthood they posited, necessitated a reconciliation with the undulating patterns of both loss and recovery that define existence. Furthermore, they understood that genuine wisdom frequently arose from a deliberate engagement with experiences that, at first glance, might appear threatening or wholly unwelcome. As the various phases of your own life continue their timeless progression, it is worthwhile to contemplate the profound lessons Persephone gleaned from her journey into the depths. Reflect upon the truth that at times the most significant personal growth unfolds within the most challenging circumstances. Consider how endings, far from being absolute conclusions, inherently create the necessary space for nascent beginnings to emerge. Ponder the notion that the courage to confront arduous transitions often yields discoveries far more precious than the comfort and security one might leave behind. With this perspective, one might then inquire what latent opportunities, what dormant potential might be patiently awaiting germination within the quiescent, fallow seasons of your personal experience. Shifting our focus from Persephone's deliberate immersion into darkness, our narrative now turns to another subterranean expedition. Yet this particular journey was propelled not by mere inquisitiveness, but by an affection so immense that it dared to defy the very foundational principles of reality itself. This is the epic of Orpheus, a legendary minstrel whose melodies possess the power to shift geological formations and pacify even the most ferocious creatures of the wild, and whose unparalleled devotion to Eurydice compelled him to attempt the utterly impossible. Orpheus was the scion of one of the 9 muses, those revered goddesses who served as the celestial founts of inspiration for all artistic endeavours and intellectual pursuits. From his earliest years he displayed an unparalleled aptitude for music. When he skillfully played his lyre, a magnificent stringed instrument meticulously fashioned by the Olympian deity Apollo himself, waterways would diminish their current to attend to his performance. Arboreal forms would incline attentively to catch every single note, and even the most savage beasts would recline in tranquil silence, utterly captivated by the harmonies that seemed to encapsulate the entire spectrum of the world's joy and sorrow. His musical artistry transcended mere aesthetic beauty. It was profoundly transformative. Farmers observed that their harvests flourished with greater yield when they could hear Orpheus practicing in the distance. Shepherds discovered that their flocks maintained remarkable tranquility and robust health when his enchanting melodies drifted across the hillsides. Even within bustling urban centres, reports circulated that disputes found swifter resolution, and the burdens of daily tasks felt significantly less onerous on days when Orpheus rendered his artistry in the public squares. However, despite the immense delight and widespread cheer his music brought to countless others, Orpheus himself frequently experienced a profound sense of isolation. He possessed the extraordinary ability to sway vast assemblies to tears or laughter, to incite them to deeds of benevolence or acts of bravery. Yet he harboured a deep yearning for a companion who comprehended not merely his musical genius, but the very essence of the individual behind the artistry, someone who perceived him as more than simply a conduit for exquisite auditory expressions. He discovered that kindred spirit in Eurydice, a graceful wood nymph whose inherent talents harmonized flawlessly with his own, while Orpheus could compose melodies that articulated the full spectrum of human feeling. Eurydice possessed an innate comprehension of the sylvan realm that allowed her to discern nuances within his musical creations that entirely eluded others. She could listen to one of his compositions and accurately ascertain whether he had crafted it at dawn or dusk, whether he had been observing avian majesty or aquatic grace, whether his spirit had been imbued with optimism or tinged with profound melancholy. Their nascent romance unfolded with the serene grace of an extended, tender melody. They would stroll hand in hand amidst arboreal tranquillity, where Orpheus would render delicate strains on his lyre, while Eurydice in turn elucidated the varied reactions of diverse fauna to different musical phrases. She imparted to him the art of integrating organic auditory elements, the serenades of birds, the soughing of wind through foliage, the murmuring of water over stones, into his compositions. He conversely demonstrated to her how the vast tapestry of human sentiment could be conveyed through temporal patterns and tonal progressions in dimensions that linguistic articulation could never fully encompass. Their nuptials were solemnized by both Olympian deities and earthly beings, a testament to their extraordinary bond. Apollo himself furnished the ceremonial harmonies, though he candidly conceded that his personal renditions appeared unadorned compared to the unparalleled achievements of his protégé. The complete pantheon of the 9 muses graced the event, each bestowing her unique creative expression to perfect the celebration. Hymen, the divine patron of matrimony, sanctified their union with fervent invocations for enduring felicity and collaborative artistic endeavour. For a fleeting period, their shared existence was the very embodiment of their aspirations. They constructed an unpretentious dwelling within a sylvan sanctuary where the sonic properties were ideally suited for musical creation. Dawns heralded the commencement of Orpheus's creative endeavours, while Eurydice diligently cultivated her verdant plot, each attuned to the cadence of the other's existence, their individual pursuits coalescing into a symphony of shared life larger than either could achieve alone. Twilight hours were dedicated to recounting daily revelations, a freshly conceived musical phrase Orpheus had developed, a distinctive avian vocalization Eurydice had mastered. However, their blissful state did not escape the notice of external parties, and not every observer harboured benevolent intentions. Aristaeus, a lesser deity who had harboured a protracted yearning for Eurydice, beheld their profound contentment with mounting bitterness. Prior to her marriage, he had presented Eurydice with tokens of affection and overtures of courtship, and her polite yet unequivocal dismissals had bruised his ego more severely than he cared to admit. One particular afternoon, while Orpheus was away conferring with fellow artists of melody, Aristaeus accosted Eurydice amidst her cultivated flora. His preliminary overtures of discourse were met with courteous yet unambiguous refusal. When he grew more importunate, implying that her station merited a spouse of greater renown than a simple minstrel, Eurydice commenced a retreat in the direction of the sylvan expanse, intending to elude his pursuit within the arboreal labyrinth, where she could navigate with greater agility than her pursuer. In her precipitate flight, she trod upon a serpent bearing lethal toxins that had been slumbering within the elevated verdure. The envenomation was instantaneous and lethal. By the time Orpheus subsequently arrived and discovered her, she had already commenced her passage to the chthonic realm, leaving behind only the diminishing heat of a corporeal form that no longer contained the essence of his beloved. Orpheus's sorrow surpassed any previously witnessed on earth. His mournful cries were so utterly despondent that they disturbed the very fabric of the cosmos. Arboreal forms divested themselves of foliage prematurely. Waterways breached their confines as if in lamentation. Untamed creatures ventured forth from their concealed lairs, no longer drawn by the aesthetic allure of his melodies as before, but compelled by a grief so immense it seemed to resonate with every living being that had ever known bereavement. For days Orpheus was rendered inert, save for his vigil at Eurydice's sepulchre, continually rendering tunes that articulated his profound torment. But gradually, incrementally, a novel concept took shape within his mind. His artistic prowess had consistently defied the bounds of possibility. Why, then, he reasoned, should mortality be unique among life's impediments? If his songs could displace geological formations and pacify tempestuous weather, perhaps they could also sway the emotions of the chthonic deities who ruled the underworld. Contrary to the counsel of all his acquaintances, Orpheus resolved to journey into the domain of the Lord of the Dead and petition for the restoration of Eurydice's life. He made his way to one of the concealed portals to the nether realm, a grotto of such profound abyssal gloom that no human had ever re-emerged from its depths. But Orpheus ventured forth accompanied solely by his lyre, reposing faith in the safeguarding power of his artistry in a domain where armaments and defensive gear would prove utterly futile. His passage through the subterranean kingdom was akin to traversing a topography sculpted from congealed grief. He passed through subterranean hollows where the rock faces ceaselessly exuded moisture, across waterways whose currents comprised the lamentations of the bereaved, through dells where the atmospheric vapour was condensed from dying breaths. Yet, everywhere he went, his melodies heralded his approach, and the denizens of this domain, entities habituated to perpetual melancholia, discovered within themselves a sensation they had almost forgotten: optimism. Even Cerberus, the formidable tricephalic hound who stood sentinel over the gates of Hades, was stirred by Orpheus's mournful strains. Instead of assailing the mortal trespasser, the great beast inclined his multiple crania and permitted his ocular organs to shut, lulled into tranquil slumber by tunes that articulated an affection so potent it surpassed the demarcation between mortality and eternity. When Orpheus finally arrived at the regal chamber of the chthonic monarchs, Hades and Persephone, his music had already announced him. The sovereign powers of the netherworld remained expectant, cognizant that they were about to hear a petition unprecedented within the annals of their dominion. Orpheus then performed for them the complete narrative of his devotion to Eurydice, their initial encounter, their romantic progression, their ephemeral joy, and his profound bereavement. But more than that, he performed the very essence of affection in sonic form, rendering harmonies that evoked within even these celestial entities the connections they cherished, the bereavements they had endured, and the profound significance imparted to existence by selfless devotion. Persephone, the queen of the underworld, possessing a unique empathy for the anguish of estrangement from cherished individuals due to her own history, shed visible tears while attending. Hades, the king of the underworld, typically impervious to human supplications, found himself recalling his personal yearning during the periods when his consort resided in the terrestrial sphere. For the first time in the history of their realm, an unprecedented occurrence, the chthonic sovereigns consented to restore a spirit to vitality. Yet this divine benevolence was not without its stringent stipulations. Eurydice was granted permission to ascend with Orpheus to the mortal realm. However, throughout their arduous journey out of the chthonic depths, he was expressly forbidden from casting a backward glance at her. He was compelled to implicitly trust that she was indeed trailing him, to harbour an unwavering conviction in that which remained beyond his immediate perception. This was a profound test, demanding that his affection prove robust enough to be guided by sheer belief rather than requiring constant tangible confirmation of her presence. The arduous trek back commenced with a profound sense of elation. Orpheus could distinctly discern the gentle cadence of Eurydice's footsteps behind him, and he instinctively perceived her close proximity, much as he had always been able to sense her presence. They meticulously retraced their path through the winding subterranean grottos and desolate valleys of the underworld, advancing steadily towards the radiant illumination that marked the critical demarcation between the realm of the departed and the vibrant land of the living. Nevertheless, as they embarked upon the final steep passage towards the surface, an insidious uncertainty began to infiltrate Orpheus's mind. The faint sounds of her following seemed to grow more indistinct, and his intuitive perception of Eurydice's presence felt increasingly equivocal. A torrent of agonizing questions assailed him. What if the deities had in fact played a cruel trick upon him? What if he was, unbeknownst to himself, ascending towards the light in utter solitude, while Eurydice languished, forever ensnared below? What if his profound faith was tragically misplaced, and his beloved was even now being irresistibly drawn back into the abyssal depths? He would thenceforth be forever barred from re-entering. Precisely as the cavern's aperture came into his field of vision, just as the welcoming warmth of the sunlit upper world began to gently caress his features, Orpheus's unwavering conviction utterly deserted him. Overcome by an irresistible impulse, he pivoted to cast a backward glance, desperate to reassure himself that Eurydice was genuinely present. And for a fleeting, agonizing instant, she was indeed there. He beheld her countenance, saw her extending her hand towards him, brimming with profound affection and compassionate understanding. But in that very same moment, she commenced to dissipate, inexorably called back to the underworld by his transgression of the god's sacred condition. Her parting words to him were utterly devoid of reproach, instead imbued with pure, enduring love. She comprehended the profound human frailty that had compelled his glance, absolving him of the very doubt that had tragically sundered them both, as she dissolved back into the encroaching gloom. Her farewell was sealed with the same gentle, empathetic smile that had initially captivated his heart. Orpheus subsequently re-entered the mortal realm in solitude, bearing a second bereavement far more crushing than the first, for he bore the agonizing knowledge of having been its sole progenitor. He made a desperate attempt to retrace his steps into the cave, but the entrance had become irrevocably sealed. The divine clemency once spurned was irretrievably withdrawn. He dedicated the remainder of his existence to the life of an itinerant minstrel, his compositions now imbued with a profound gravity of sorrow and an unparalleled sagacity that rendered them even more potent than in his earlier days. People journeyed from distant territories to witness his performances, drawn not by the promise of joy, but by the profound resonance his music offered in helping them to grasp their own personal tragedies, their internal battles with trust and apprehension, and their experiences of loving with such intensity that the mere spectre of loss became an almost unbearable burden. The enduring narrative of Orpheus and Eurydice has been recounted and reinterpreted across countless millennia precisely because it profoundly resonates with an intrinsic and universal dimension of the human condition. Every individual encounters junctures where action must be predicated on unwavering faith rather than absolute certainty, where the very essence of love necessitates implicit trust in that which remains unseen or unprovable. We are all intimately familiar with the powerful allure of glancing backward, of instinctively seeking validation and demanding reassurance when confronted with the imperative to simply believe. As consciousness gently yields to the embrace of sleep, one might reflect upon the subtle wisdom this venerable narrative imparts regarding the intricate dynamics of conviction and apprehension, which personal odysseys within your own existence demand an unwavering reliance on belief rather than absolute certitude. Which profound connections in your life compel you to accept their fundamental truth, even when tangible proof or sensory evidence remains elusive. Perhaps the most transcendent melodies we collectively fashion are not composed through traditional instruments, but rather through the sheer fortitude to continue our progression towards the beckoning light, even when we are constrained from turning back to definitively confirm that love steadfastly follows in our wake.